We're going to call this workshop to order. It is 1:07 on Tuesday, October 13th, 2020. This is the superintendent's workshop to run through some presentations that Dr. Moore has put together with staff. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Moore.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We do have a number of presentations today, 5 in total. Just to set the stage for today's conversation, Mr. Meyer will begin with an item which we're very proud of, which is the revisions to our school administrator evaluation manual and the process that we'll be using and how it aligns to our district's strategic plan. So excited to hear Mr. Meyer present that item, followed by Mr. Fagan presenting an item regarding a piggyback item as it relates to solid waste collection. We'll then move on to Mr. Fagan, which is an opportunity to enhance insurance coverage for our retired employees, followed by Mr. Bass, a presentation on a legislative review. This is updated information based on the dialogue the board had at our last workshop. And then we will conclude with a review of the health and safety measures Stage 1. That is the opportunity to share the immediate action that I have taken, as well as staff, principals, and school sites as it related from our last convening last Tuesday. So looking forward to having that conversation as well. But if it's the will of the chair, we will now turn it over to Mr. Meyer.
Dr. Moore, I'm seeing on Teams, Mrs. Berenborg is joining us. She has made a comment on Teams that she would like to make a statement. Mrs. Berenborg, is this in regards to today's agenda? Your statement?
It's in regards to why I'm here and not there.
Maybe you can hold that at the end. That's fine.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, I do want to make a statement, though.
In regards to the agenda or a personal matter?
Again, it's why I'm not there. That's why I wanted to make the statement.
Maybe she can't.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Speak into the mic.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
You're not into your.
You gotta speak in the mic.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now I can.
Okay. So we have 3 hours, a lot of information to get through. So can we try to keep it brief? Go ahead, Mrs. Berenborg.
Thank you. I just wanted to apologize to my fellow board members. I am ill. I have gone to my doctor, and he has told me that I have to socially distance, and I had a COVID test done. I am waiting the results, and I keep checking it every 10 minutes to see if I can come in. So he told me that I will be able to come in because I am on an antibiotic, and I have been. So I can come in as soon as I get the test result. Okay, so I wanted you to know that's why I'm not there.
That's so ironic considering the fact that my daughter's on quarantine and has a negative test and isn't allowed to go to school.
Okay. Dr. Moore, we're going to turn this over to you, and then I believe you're turning it over to Mr. Bass. So,
Mr. Meyer,
I'm sorry, Mr. Meyer.
Thank
You're
you.
way down there on the end. So, welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the end, but not forgotten. So thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Superintendent. The first item we have here is to brief the board on the SERC Administrator Evaluation Manual for 2020-2021. Section 1012-34, Section 6 requires district school boards to annually review administrator evaluation systems and make sure that they are in alignment with all sections of statute. And if there is any need or substantial revision to that system, then it should be brought to the board. So as Dr. Moore stated at the onset, as we looked at our administration evaluation manual, we knew that there was room for improvements. The reason that I'm bringing this item before the board and not Mr. Bass would be that with the district realignment, we have an Office of Innovation within CNI. So over the course of the past few months, Ms. Cynthia Emerson, who I'm not going to steal all of her thunder because she deserves a lot of credit for the work that was done here, partnered with administrators, partnered with the folks in HCO, partnered with the Department of Education, and really took a look at the district strategic plan, the Florida statutes, our evaluation system, and came up with a product that, quite honestly, I'm not sure that anyone else has thought to do it this way. I do sit on a committee, a statewide committee that's looking at a revision to the Florida Principal Leadership Standards. What Ms. Emerson was able to do was to mesh the Florida Principal Leadership Standards along with this district strategic plan to better align the evaluation tool so that when we use this, it isn't simply compliance. I think that's what we've seen from evaluation tools in the past, that they're just checking boxes, that no one really understands the intent, they don't understand the alignment, and they can be confusing. But the product that Ms. Emerson was able to develop and bring to Dr. Moore for review and approval, and was also subsequently able to get that through the Department of Education, maybe in record time. I don't know. That was pretty quick turnaround. I think that's because she did such a good job. So we have what we feel to be a really great product that, like I said, is not just going to be something that we step through the pages where I have to do this page on October and I have to do this page in November, but it really is aligned to the work that we want to do. It encompasses, like I said, both the strategic plan and an item that I'll be bringing later this month, the school improvement plans, where principals now make sure that they have 4 components to their school improvement plans, and a portion of their success in getting these implemented within their schools will also fall into this administration evaluation system. So as I said, many districts right now, as we've stated a number of times, the status quo is the status quo. They're not thinking about improving their systems. I appreciate Dr. Moore's leadership and Ms. Emerson's leadership in making sure that we have a strong product that was developed to improve outcomes for our students. And I'll tell you, we all have heard a lot about evaluation systems in the past. It was the flavor of the day, right, a number of years ago, a decade ago, and many people have just let them sit, and they're not taking a good hard look at needed revision. So very excited that we are able to make such a strong improvement to our administrative evaluation system to present to the board tonight. So Ms. Emerson, what'd I forget? Come on up here and share your good work. Here. You want to take my seat?
Yeah, I want
just take my seat.
As mentioned, we are really excited to bring this before the board. It's already been approved by the Florida Department of Education, which is very exciting. We had an administrator committee that was able to give feedback on the evaluation protocols. And I think what was most exciting and what we heard most feedback about was that it all streamlined the process that we're already doing when it comes to the hard work being put into the school improvement plans and aligning our goals with our deliberate practice. So if you go through the evaluation procedures, you will see we now aligned the timeline with when we're doing the majority of our assessment pieces throughout the year. So when principals are meeting with their evaluating administrator or assistant principals, they can use data to drive that decision and prove that the work that they're putting in and the action steps are actually making a difference. If you go into the actual framework, which is very exciting, there is a crosswalk between our strategic plan and the FSLA, the Florida Principal Leadership Standards. So now,
Sorry for interrupting, but can you tell me what page you're on?
sure. If you go to page 18, there is a crosswalk now available so that administrators can look at how our strategic plan aligned framework relates to the Florida Principal Leadership Standards. And then if you continue to page 21, this is the new leadership framework, specifically aligned to the Florida Leadership Principal Standards. And so the indicators now are streamlined to our actual strategic plan, aligning to our 5 focus areas of academic success, equity, culture and climate, communication and engagement, and as you continue through, talent, development, and support, which we know is a major priority that we have, along with, on page 36, organization and fiscal responsibility. The framework we tried to keep as closely aligned to what principals were accustomed to in the past as far as their self-evaluation. They have an opportunity to share where they feel they are at. That feedback then is given to their evaluator, where they will align all of the different strategies they've used and action steps in order to move up throughout the year. But I think what is most unique about our new framework is if you go to the very last page, on page 50, which this was an over 100-page document previously. It is now down to 50 pages, which I really enjoy. But page 50 is the deliberate practice growth of the school improvement plan targets. So while we know we are aligning 4 school improvement plan goals for each school, they will now be monitored closely by their evaluator on those 4 goals. They will tie the deliberate practice specifically to an indicator in our strategic plan, FSLA aligned framework, and they will be able to show that progress and the data points along the way of how they're improving in those areas. So I think I briefly was able to wrap it up in a bow for you, but.
Any questions?
Yeah, may I ask you a question?
Go ahead.
So for a parent watching this right now and listening to you speak about the change in this evaluation model, why is it important?
It's important because it's aligned to the actual school improvement plan goals. And so with that now weighting a little bit over 33% of administrator evaluations, I would say it's more important now than ever to take a look at what the goals are for your school site, the school that your child attends. And what I really feel is valuable about that is we were very strategic as a district in communicating the areas that we expect every single school to move in, which are standards-based instruction for 2 of those goals, a climate and culture goal, and now a school theme goal. And what's been very exciting is that when you say you have a specific school theme, now you will show through your school improvement plan how you're getting there. So if you are choosing a school for your child, now you can see specifically what action steps that school has taken, and you know that that principal will be held accountable in their evaluation, as well as their assistant principals, to making that the truth.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much for all of that hard work on this.
Thank you.
I was sad to see you leave as a principal from your school side. I think you did some great things at Vero Beach Elementary, but it's obvious why Dr. Moore chose to move you into the position that you're in to help to work with Mr. Meyer to make these types of things happen. So
Thank
thank
you.
you for using your expertise to make it happen.
I really appreciate that.
Yes.
Any other comments or questions, board members? Go ahead.
Thank you so much for presenting this to us. Am I on? Can you hear me, Mrs. Barenborg? Okay. Thank you so much for presenting this to us. I have a question about who sat on the committee. If you can just let us know who the committee members were and how those were selected.
Absolutely. So it was Ann Bieber, and she is a middle school principal. It was Aretha Vernette. She's an elementary school principal of Title I. And then it was Dr. Bacon, who is a former assistant principal and now principal at Osceola Magnet.
Okay, so what are the main, if you can identify some of the main differences between the previous evaluation system, other than the pages? And if you can just, I know you touched on some of those in your presentation, but if we can just kind of summarize what those differences are, if you can.
Absolutely. So in the past, the FSLA was a compliance-driven for our district document. And so we have now taken the FSLA and have created a crosswalk so that we are hitting on the strategic goal plan and making sure that we're monitoring that for every single school site and administrator. The deliberate practice, principals were given the opportunity to pick which goals they wanted to work on. The district usually supported them in deciding on one goal, usually aligned to standards-based instruction. Now the principals will be required to work on their school improvement plan and choose indicators that are going to move their school in relation to their school improvement plan goals. So instead of a separate document for compliance with deliberate practice, it is now specifically tied to the action and work that we're doing as a district. We just recently We're almost done finishing up our impact review walks. And in every impact review, the principals are going back and they're sharing exactly what their school improvement plan goals are. And as a district, we're looking and seeing how can we support you in moving forward and what are your action steps from here based on our walkthrough and data. This is going to be a document that will now hold administrators to doing the work, and it'll be evaluating them based on the work being done. That's now 33% of their evaluation. So that holds now a very high percentage of whether or not they're considered highly effective or effective. We also took the value added measure that was given from the state that was at 50% and brought that down to 33.33%. Per state statute, that is the requirement that it has to at least be at that amount, because we felt that 33% coming from the actual goals you're working on as a school is a lot more valuable because it's specific and explicit on what the needs are for that particular environment. So it's giving principals and assistant principals the opportunity to, as professionals, see where they need to make the growth, and then it's treating them as professionals in, are you doing what you said you're going to do, and following through and adjusting as needed.
So here's what I like about this. What I like about it is that it's not a standalone document.
Right.
That you mentioned crosswalk, the comparison and the alignment between the school improvement plan, the district strategic plan, the Florida standards, and the work that actually gets done on a daily basis are all connected, essentially, and nothing stands alone or apart from one another. Those are the kinds of things that I have been kind of talking about for a while. I think you and I talked about this in detail at some point or another. And it is so incredibly important that we have an evaluation system that looks the way that it looks right now. I'm interested to see how it's going to change when the new standards come out. I think sometime maybe next year is the estimation, but as it stands right, I mean, I'm very happy to see what is being presented. I think that it is doable, it is workable, holding principals accountable and assistant principals accountable for the work that they're doing. That is not separate and apart from what we're asking teachers to do. I think that's important. So thank you for that, and it's just my pleasure to be able to support this, so thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. At this time, at the request and the need, we need to take about a 15-minute break, and we will rejoin in approximately 15 minutes. Thank you. Meeting back to order. It is Tuesday, October 13th, 2020. We are in the midst of our superintendent workshop on our first item, and we're in the process of review of the 2020-2021 FLDOE approved SDRC School Administrator Evaluation Manual, and Mr. Meyer and Ms. Emerson was giving us a presentation, and we were in our question and answer portion, and we still have a question from Board Member Berenborg, so I'm going to open the floor up to Mrs. Berenborg.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you for the hard work on this plan, and that, and the fact that it's related to the strategic plan. I want to also ask two questions about it. Where in the plan could you point out, I think it's 3.6 under communication, but I wanted to double check on interaction with parents.
Yes, that would fall under relationships. You're right in that indicator of 3.6. But you could also talk about your parent communication in a lot of the other elements in regards to action steps that you have taken in order to reach highly effective. There's a lot of different indicators that go into like community partnerships and making sure you're communicating your goals and expectations. And is there a specific way that you want it to be written?
No, I just wanted parents to know that that is taken into account.
Yes, it is.
Administrator's evaluation.
Yes. And so they have to, in order to move up to highly effective, ensure that they're sustaining relationships with their key stakeholders. And it specifically mentions parent organization, community leaders, mentors, and really gives a clear avenue for what we consider through the School District of Indian River County to be a highly effective leader.
All right, thank you. Also, where in this plan would it be considered for follow through on school board policies?
So that also aligns with our FEPS. So if you go into the FEPS indicator, that's one that is, it's specifically aligned to FSLA because it is kept exactly the same, because we want to make sure that every single administrator understands that they are speaking and represent not only their school, but our board and the board policies. And that is their responsibility to understand them, make sure that they are abiding by them, and that they're communicating with all of their stakeholders in regards to them.
Right, you said under FEPS, but where in the focus areas would that be considered?
The FEPS is under
3.1?
Yep.
Under communication?
Yep, communication and engagement.
All right, I would appreciate this if I were an administrator, because it makes it very, very clear as to what the expectations are, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
I appreciate that too. Thank you.
Mrs. Work, I have an additional question once board members are done.
You have a, go ahead.
Great, thank you. So in looking at this evaluative process, Dr. Moore, this question would be for you. The board doesn't do the hiring and firing of personnel within the district. That is not under our purview. That is your responsibility. How will you use this tool to help you to build strong leadership and sustain leadership throughout our schools going forward?
Chair, the evaluation system that has been created is absolutely outstanding. I will be the one who conducts all three phases of the evaluation. It is a tool that ensures that we have the opportunity to identify where we can grow principals and administrators, district staff, district administrators, while at the same time clearly define what the expectations are. So moving from a compliance document, which was a process that you did A, B, C, D, and E, regardless of the outcome or regardless of the opportunity to grow, was not the way in which to go, but creating a collegial process where we're working together to define these are the goals in which, these are the areas in which we're going to focus in on. This is how we're going to maximize the organizational strength of our district by coordinating those efforts tied together through our strategic plan is something no other district is doing. So it is the coordination of defining how to grow world-class educational leaders while at the same time clearly defining and having upfront and honest conversations regarding opportunities to improve practice as we move through that growth of those particular administrators.
Thank you.
Mrs. Rosario?
Dr. Moore, will you be the one, you said that you were going to be the one to do all of the principal and assistant principal, I heard, evaluations with this tool here?
With principals.
With principals?
Yes.
Are you intending to do that moving forward or for just this year? For just this year or moving forward after this year?
So through the chair, I think because of the size of the district and having the opportunity to evaluate principals, it gives me a deep understanding of the support that's being provided. So it gives me a great deal of information on those who may be at the district or on my specific teams regarding that specific support. So it's just not, sitting in one place evaluating a small number of individuals. It's taking the highest level of accountability in speaking through individuals at school sites and during very formal, these are the goals. What do you need from me as the superintendent in order to ensure you're successful? So it's a level of accountability for me as a superintendent from the very beginning to say, this is what I need to provide to these employees, these principals, to grow them. And at the mid-year, it is, as I just said, a point of accountability. If you received X, is Y taking place, which is student achievement, student growth. And if you have received it and we're not performing, let's dig a little bit deeper and have additional conversations on how we have it. So this enhances the level of the conversation. It increases the organizational intelligence where I have multiple opportunities to enforce accountability across the organization.
So what I find, thank you for answering that. I think it's important for everyone to know that that is the goal at this point, because I'm sure that in Miami, where you came from, the superintendent is not directly responsible for evaluating or performing the evaluation of every single principal in that district. It's extremely large. And in past practice here in this district, assistant superintendents or directors or executive directors would be responsible for doing principal evaluations. So moving forward this year, I think it is pretty strategic that you would take that on. I believe that I'm just assuming that there are some leadership positions here in the district office that you also would be directly supervising, different in the evaluation system, I'm supposing. Is this this same kind of evaluation system for district leadership as well? Okay, interesting. And what I appreciate about this moving forward is, number one, like you mentioned, your current principals will be able to really have direct accountability to you as the district superintendent. And two, that they get to learn what that process is like in having these conversations with those they will then supervise and engage in the evaluation system. So principals with assistant principals, essentially. Absolutely. And I think that's important too, because there's what I find as a school building administrator, oftentimes it's very difficult to mentor someone into having guiding conversations and really taking a self-evaluation, which is a part of this, a part of this development, this plan, and actually using that self-evaluation to guide those conversations. And that's something that doesn't often happen, is being able to kind of train someone to say, this is how that conversation looks like. This is how you ask questions to guide the conversation, rather than tell somebody, well, this is how I should have done it, or this is how I would have done it, or if I were you, it should look this way. Those are different, because those are kind of like hand, fist down, rather
Right.
than both of you really working together in building skills. So I appreciate that, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
So with that, I just want to acknowledge, I know Mr. Meyer acknowledged Ms. Emerson's work. This is outstanding, innovative work. The strength of our strategic plan just got significantly stronger because we've aligned the energy, the expectation, and support, which you hear me talk a lot about, and the balance between the two. This document accomplishes that. So thank you very much for your leadership and innovation. Thank you, Ms. Emerson. Mr. Meyer as well.
Madam Chair, one more, please, if you don't mind. Dr. Moore, would it be prudent of us, knowing now that this is also going to be for district leadership as well, to also include here school and district administrator evaluation tool rather than just school? I see a no from Mr. Meyer. Only so that, we know that it's for both.
So I will just say, this was not written to be a district evaluation
switch
tool
that.
yet.
Okay.
And so maybe that's something we could work on. I know that Mr. Bass and I had talked about that.
Okay.
Okay, so that will be next.
I'm overeager.
Thank you.
Dr. Moore, are there any items on here that we could push to the next superintendent workshop, or do you feel that we need to cover all these today? Because we're going to have a lengthy meeting this evening. I would like to try to shorten this so we can, I know there's some other areas that staff needs to be focusing on at the moment. It's up to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just taking a second to review. I think we can cover items B and C extremely quickly. They're just on the agenda for this evening, so I want the opportunity for us to quickly preview those particular items and answer any questions we may have. And then D and E will be dependent upon questions and the dialogue in which we partake. So I think we could be relatively quick on two of those items.
Mrs. Barenborg is letting you know through Teams, I don't know if you have like that, you're difficult to hear. She's having trouble hearing you.
Okay. Hearing me?
I think Mrs. Zork is difficult.
You have to
yeah.
speak in the mic.
Okay. That's why I love having everyone present, so everyone can hear. So what I was wondering is, I'm looking at legislative priorities. If we put that onto next week, Mr. Bass can take care of some areas that he needs to address.
Mr. Chair, we can do that with the only caveat, the conversation at the last workshop was that information needed to be submitted to the Florida School Board Association. I've been in contact with Ms. Messina, so I'm sure we can pull that at a little bit of a later date, and they could hold and wait if we brought it at the next meeting.
I think that might be a good idea, Mrs. Zork. I think our legislative priorities might change as a result of the meeting tonight, so it might be prudent to wait.
Okay, I do too. Are we okay with that?
Yeah,
board members?
absolutely.
Okay, because I feel like
That would be
Mr. Bass
fruitful,
could,
yes.
yeah.
Preoccupied.
All right.
So that, we will now move to item B, and I give the floor to Mr. Fagan.
Thank you, Sue, through the chair. Not quite as exciting as the first item. This is a renewal for solid waste management pickup. This is the third renewal for the district. First renewal was in 1819, second renewal was in 1920. This one will carry us through December of 20 to December of 21. If we go back to the prior services, we were self-services. We had our own garbage truck, our own garbage men, and we ran around the district and picked up garbage. Prior to the 1819, Plant Services, Bob Michaels in the back, and Purchasing presented a presentation to the board and expressed it would be cheaper to contract this out than to continue on to do this in-house. One, because you would have to buy a new garbage truck, which requires specialized skills to work on and also drive. And also you need to hire 2 dedicated drivers to drive the truck and run around the district and pick up garbage and take it to the landfill and et cetera. So it was decided that going out was more in the best interest of the district. We looked around the state of Florida and we found a piggyback in Miami-Dade that we could piggyback on that was competitive. And when we get ready to do that process again, we'll look around, see if there's one competitive. If there's not, we'll rebid our own.
Okay.
Yep. I'm just really happy we're not picking up our own garbage. I'm imagining you bringing this forward again continues to mean that you the belief is consistent that it is better to outsource this process in the district. Is that the case, Mr. Fagan?
Through the chair, yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much, then. Thank you for bringing this forward, and I'm happy to approve it tonight.
Any other comments or questions? No? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Fagan, and the floor is still yours.
Moving on to the next item. This is a review of approval of acceptance of Florida Blue Medicare Advantage Plan with prescription drugs for retirees. Before I start, I need to thank the team, the whole risk management team. I also need to thank, in the audience, we have Brandon Schultz from Florida Blue and Mary DiMarcato from the Risk Management Department. Of course, Aon assisted us, and of course, HITEF. This development has probably been well over in a year of development. What you have before you tonight, and the importance of this is you have 3 new options for all retirees. You have what I might call an elite plan, a middle level plan, and then a economic plan. It allows retirees to select whatever plan best fits their price point, their benefits, their needs, their co-payments, and et cetera. The also advantage of the plan is once you're in one of the plans at an open enrollment period, you can change plans. You can go one of the other plans. It allows you to stay within the group. These are new plans for the district, so they're brand new. We're going to look at the evaluation and evaluate them over the year. Who participates? Are there some better plans that might be better? Could we evaluate and maybe shift? Could we consolidate? Do we need a fourth? We don't know. The main thing is it's for the benefit of the employees, it's for the retirees, it gives them choice, and if this choice is not the right choice, we'll reevaluate and come back again.
Yeah? Okay, great. So, Mr. Fagan, in discussing this matter before today, I asked you, this is the second time, board members, you might remember this is being brought to us, and I asked Mr. Fagan to clearly explain what the changes were from the first time it was brought forward to now. Mr. Fagan, if you could perhaps repeat
Yes, ma'am.
that statement or your comments.
Yes, ma'am, through the chair. The first presentation, it was one plan. It was called an elite plan. It was only one other option for retirees. You could stay on the plan we have, or you could switch to Florida Blue. That's all there was. That plan was still relatively, had a high price point. And for some retirees, it may be beyond their reach. So instead of having them go out on the street and find another alternative plan, we went back and said, okay, give me some other price points. Give me some other options. They're all basically the same, except now you go from $268 down to $192 to $104. So that allows anyone within a certain price point that they're looking for, they can look at the benefits, the co-pays, and the deductibles, pick the one that best fits them, and select from there. So the difference between the two is before you only had one option, now you have 3.
May I continue? May I ask a question? Thank you. So, Mr. Fagan, this is in the best interest of employees, but it's also in the best interest of the district, as we discussed the first time.
Through the chair, yes, ma'am.
Yes, financial best interest of the district. This has been brought before HITEF how many times now?
For an official vote, twice.
Okay.
Presented to the HITEF in conception has been probably going on for over a year.
Great. Can you just explain what where we are with those official votes in this item as it comes for approval from the board today?
Through the chair, I do not have the official date, but it was officially voted on probably 2 weeks ago. It was unanimous for all members.
Okay, thank you very much. That was the question that I had. Thank you.
Madam Chair, since we're on that conversation, Mr. Fagan, can you please define for the audience and for those who are unfamiliar with the words HITEF and Aon, so that they understand the role of HITEF and Aon in this process?
Through the chair, yes, ma'am. Aon is Aon to the best of my ability. That is their name, AON. That's just the name of their organization. Okay. Had to check with my wing. HITEF stands for Health Insurance Advisory Task Force. They are an advisory organization. They have no expressed or implied power, but they represent all the unions, all the non-bargaining units of the district. They also have retirees on the plan. We meet monthly to go over the plan, expenditures, revenues. We discuss new rates. We discuss these new programs. We discuss any new programs that are coming up, and they vote and oversee the plan from an advisory standpoint.
Thank you.
Yeah, and what I think is great about that and having this process is the first vote, sir, was that a unanimous vote?
Through the chair, no ma'am.
So, this was brought to the board, it was brought to HITEF, there have been continued conversations. Now you bring a recommendation, Mr. Superintendent, Dr. Superintendent, you bring a recommendation to us that now has a unanimous vote from HITEF moving forward with retirees, all union members being a part of that. So thank you for continuing to work through HITEF and collaborating with those members so that we can approve this and feel that all parties are being represented. Thank you.
To the chair, thank you.
Any other comments? No? Well, thank you, Mr. Fagan, for your work on this. I think it's going to be a benefit to our retirees. So thank you for your hard work and staff for their work on this.
Thank you, ma'am.
And through the chair, we, as agreed upon, we will not do the legislative updates, which brings us to the district review of health and safety measures, stage 1. And I'd just like to provide an update to the board regarding our last business meeting, the dialogue that we had regarding face coverings, vote, no vote, and where we currently were. And I thought it was my responsibility as one of your 2 employees to take immediate action as a response to the conversation that was had during that evening. So I will briefly walk you through the last 4 business days, what we have done to rectify, improve, and to clarify the expectations of this board, the expectations of this district leadership team, and the collective expectation of administrators within our schools. We initially convened a principal meeting the following day. As tired as some of us were, we still had that particular meeting. That was the opportunity to clearly define, review the opening of schools plan, the expectations that have been established within that particular plan, and clearly from my mouth to principals' ears, define that expectation of adhering to a plan that had been created and working with all bodies within the schools to ensure that it is being followed, while at the same time taking advantage of not only setting expectations, but ensuring, as an educator at heart, to dig into the dialogue and conversation around best practices. What are things that we can do in schools that may be happening in certain schools that all schools can learn from, where we can enhance or improve some of the flexibility in systems that we have been created? Some of those things were modifying arrangements to furniture, just not removing furniture, but creating furniture in certain ways where you're creating space, defining space where social distancing can take place. Students know and are empowered to move to those particular spaces. Visual cues being placed in the environment that promote social distancing. And what you see as you walk the schools are many opportunities where we've defined for our young children where to stand, whether it be before school or after school or on your way in the lunch line. Stand here because you are now socially distanced in this sticker. And making sure students are empowered and know in that time the sticker's there because it's a safe space. It is a mask-free place. Continuing to use other places, we say strategic removal of furniture, but looking at media spaces, cafetoriums, auditoriums, creating opportunities to make those rotating or floating classrooms. Repurposing teacher centers, and one of the things that I'm very excited about is opportunities to continue to connect teachers across our district. And we have lesson studies and we have learning walks for administrators and for teachers all the time, but really connecting educators and saying, are there innovative, creative ways for you to design the classroom experience to continue to encourage students to come back, participate in brick and mortar experiences, while at the same time increasing or enhancing your level of safety and security. And I think when you put teachers in a room, you define a problem and you support them in creating solutions, you always seem to find solutions. Face covering breaks in outdoors and hallways, and I think that was one of the opportunities for improvement. And it is the expectation of us collectively to ask questions, to probe, speak with our students. Students here in this county are absolutely wonderful, 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 as are our educators. And we have a system that has been approved by this board. We need to ensure everyone is enforcing And one of the ways that we can enforce it is to ask questions. Do you know while you're outside? You're okay. And if you're comfortable taking the mask off, they should feel empowered. Information is power, and making sure our students have that information are things that are going to ensure happens. And then use of independent center activities to increase social distancing. And one of the examples that I grow there are classrooms in our district where it's a choose your path or choose where you sit. You can work collectively with students in this particular piece of the classroom, but over here it is a socially distanced place, which goes back to some of the opportunities where teachers can begin to define. So becoming more intentional and explicit about the implementation and delivery of the plan that we approved was the outcome from that particular day. The following days were opportunities for me to, as well as Mr. Bass, we've walked all but 2 schools now, walking with the principals really to define a protocol, which is a health and safety walk. And this just isn't me doing it or Mr. Bass doing it upon our visits when we are there, but creating that system for principals to do daily and modeling that with our principals as we walked. Looking for opportunities to ensure the things that we learned the previous day are being followed, looking at the level of implementation that's currently taking place, problem solving and working with principals, while at the same time assessing where our reality was and where there would be opportunities to improve. And we were excited and encouraged as we took those measures. Also working with Cabinet, ensuring that we are looking at all areas as it relates to health and safety, reviewing all of our statutory requirements, looking at the legal impacts and priorities as we prepare to move into the next level of dialogue. We continue to work through this plan, and as we review the current level of implementation, and as I said at that board meeting, there are opportunities to improve. I think we've done the appropriate action moving forward to ensure that this plan, as it has been designed, as it has been created, not only has it been communicated in terms of the expectation of this board, support has been provided. We will continue to grow and hold ourselves accountable for the implementation of the plan. And I think that will take us and pay dividends. That isn't where the conversation ends in a lot of situations. That's kind of where the conversation continues. I thought it was my obligation to bring to you the immediate actions that I have taken. In looking at follow-up action, I think I will be provided with some direction this evening as it relates to next steps in stage 2. I would be very happy with conducting the research, conducting and pulling together individuals really to take a deep understanding of how we would develop a plan to phase out, how we would develop a plan to move away from masks, and more importantly, how do we establish the criteria, the gating criteria that would be necessary to begin implementation. So we're looking forward to receiving that information, developing a plan, if that is the will of the board, moving forward. So with that, Madam Chair, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay. Mrs. Rosario?
Thank you, Dr. Moore. I don't really have much in terms of feedback with this, so I appreciate the work that you've put in, obviously, at our request to provide this for us. I think the conversations that we have tonight are certainly going to help with those next steps, as you just mentioned. And I certainly believe that what has just been presented to us, it could help guide our conversations this evening as we know what you've observed, essentially. So I do appreciate that.
Thank you.
Dr. Schiff?
I don't really have much to add, other than I am glad to see that the document that you originally created, what we see is that that's a dynamic document, that is not something static that occurred only in August. But we continue to review and examine and improve, and this is a working document. And so what you presented here indicates how that's occurring ongoingly, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate your attentiveness to it. That's all I've
Thank
got
you,
for now.
and I continue to be encouraged. I won't mention names, but I had the opportunity this morning to meet with a nurse. And just in that conversation and dialogue, the opportunities to pull together a nurse and teachers and really have dialogue about how we make modifications, how are you successful in that environment, what can we learn to apply to classrooms and organizational structure and movement and thinking differently. And worlds are similar in some ways, in other ways absolutely not similar. But that is just one sign of opportunities really to begin to answer the questions and begin the difficult dialogue and conversation about how we continue to move forward in the midst of a pandemic.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Mrs. Sork. I like the fact that you mentioned that you met with a nurse. I think that's wonderful. I had a concern regarding next steps. There's a bullet point that says consult with multidisciplinary stakeholders on strategies for social distancing and improvements to the reopening plan. That bullet point, Dr. Moore, is that continuous collaboration with community members in the way that you did this morning through communication and sharing of information in that manner? Or I have a concern that perhaps this is a new way to say stakeholder committee. Can you speak to that for me?
Absolutely. Through the chair, I think it's my responsibility to lean on experts. When it comes to systems and structures and teaching and learning, I would consider myself humbly an expert. When it comes to a pandemic, I do not. When it comes to creating a plan on how we operate, I think it is pulling in experts across. It's working with teachers. It's working with administrators. So is it to convene a task force, or is it to create opportunities to engage in dialogue with experts? I think they're one and the same. So it is a continued conversation to create for this board a plan that looks at all liabilities, a plan that looks at what the impact would be when and if and how. And I think it's my opportunity to fully vet a plan. It would be naive and immature of me to create my own plan without seeking expertise of other individuals to ensure that this is the most appropriate plan that addresses the needs for our children in our schools.
Great. Mrs. Sork, may I continue? Thank you very much. I would absolutely agree with you. In crafting board policy, we're always very careful to make sure that we are mindful of statutes. So it's interesting you bring up the nursing point as well. In conversations with another nurse in our community, perhaps, it was made very clear to me that nurses are not able to require patients to wear masks. In fact, the hospital does not have the right. There are patient rights that allow patients to not wear masks. And I think it's an important point and something that we share with the nursing industry as a challenge. I'm sure there are some nurses that would like to require patients to wear masks, but they are not able to do so because of the laws enacted in statute by legislators and because of the Constitution and the Constitution-making process. Thank you for sharing that. Earlier today, you and I had an opportunity to discuss liability. You've mentioned that today several times, the word liability. You had some concerns that there might be some financial impact to the district if the vote tonight is to make masks optional in the school district of Indian River County. I asked you for some type of documentation as to, written documentation as to the validity of that statement, because I have some concerns about that. Do you have documentation to provide as to proposed liability?
Through the chair, I can provide an update to all of our board members regarding that potential impact, and then I will certainly follow up in writing as it relates to the information that I will now share. As you know, we are working under the innovative instructional plan that's approved by the Florida Department of Education. Within that plan is the allowance to receive full FTE for students regardless of instructional model for the first FTE. When you look at funding for students who are in a virtual school environment, they provide funding for those students in what they call a truncated FTE. Truncated because they don't receive full services. So as an example, transportation, obviously those students aren't part of transportation. Class size, additional funding we receive as an offset for class size, we don't receive. If COVID didn't exist, God bless that day, in the 5,694 students who are currently enrolled, which is 63% of our district, that allowance from the Florida Department of Education wasn't there. It would have cost the district at a tune of $3.4 million for the first FTE period. We do not know, because the state hasn't provided that information, if that will be extended or will it not be extended for the second semester or the second FTE period. That is the information that we would need to seek. That would be a financial liability.
Thank you, Dr. Moore, for that explanation. Board members, I'd like to let you know that this morning I was in contact with the Department of Education because I found what Dr. Moore said to be extremely concerning and would definitely have an impact on our ability to make a decision tonight, as he made it very clear that it would for him. I respect and understand that. It is the direction that I have received from the Department of Education that that will not be the case. And funding will not be affected going forward by any decision made by any school board to make masks optional. And I would ask that Dr. Moore, at the advice of this board, go to the Department of Education and ask for clarity about that before we make our vote tonight. I think it's important that we have real clarity around that situation rather than speculating as to possible outcomes. Thank you. Mrs. Zork, I recognize we cannot take a motion here, but I do feel it's important to direct the superintendent.
Madam Chair.
She asked me a question. I'm just going to agree that anytime information is presented, if new findings are brought forward, that clarity would be appreciated.
Through the chair, I assure you the information I presented is accurate.
So you disagree with Mrs. Justice?
I don't know who Ms. Justice spoke to or what information she was shared with her, but I can assure you from information shared with superintendents regarding a direction from the Florida Department of Education, it hasn't been issued. Will it be issued? I don't know. That's information I will definitely follow up.
So I hear what the superintendent is saying, and I'm going to do my best to make sure that the communication I have is shared with him before the meeting tonight, because I think it's important, and I think our role as school board members is important. And while I respect the superintendent, he takes direction from this school board, and I will make sure that he gets the proper guidance from the DOE so that we can make a good decision. Thank you.
Mrs. Justice, was that an email? Because I think that's important for
No,
not
it was
only
not.
just...
It was not an email. That was in a phone conversation with one of our representatives who did speak with Mr. Corcoran.
Okay, because if the information's going to be shared with the superintendent, I would like to try, if there's a way to get that in writing.
In writing, yes, absolutely. And that's what I asked for from
Before
the
the meeting.
superintendent today. Yeah, I did feel like it was an important thing to have in writing rather than speculating about outcomes, to have clear direction. And I think the superintendent is right in saying that there are some unknowns here, and there are decisions, many different factors that weigh into the decision-making process. I would argue that none that would supersede the rights of a parent to their minor child in directing their education and medical care, and that is the point that we will discuss further tonight when we discuss that motion.
Okay. Mrs. Rosario?
I did not hear any of the word that was brought from Mrs. Justice was speculation. I did not hear a speculation. What I heard was an opinion. A question was asked of the superintendent as to what the possible financial impact may be. And what I heard from the superintendent was that the possible financial impact might be XYZ, and then he proceeded to explain what that might be as it related to FTE. But I do appreciate the phone call that you made to the Department of Education. And in the same way that we are asking Dr. Moore to provide something in writing, I would ask the same thing that Mrs. Zork just asked, which is provided to us in writing.
Absolutely.
You made a phone call, provide it to us in writing. We, at this point, I'm very happy to move tonight's vote to another date as we await something in writing. I think it would be prudent of us to collect all of the information that we have, including whatever you received in writing, and give the board enough time to actually do that research so that whatever is on the agenda tonight as a vote, we can vote on at our next meeting. I think that would give everybody enough time. Maybe we can even ask the superintendent to put together a special meeting next week before our next school board meeting. It just seems that now that we have new information that might affect tonight's conversation and vote one way or the other, that again, it would be prudent of us to do that. Dr. Moore, I do have a question for clarity for those who are listening. Could you please let us know the dates of the first FTE?
The first FTE was approximately 2 weeks ago. I think it finished Friday before last.
And then
So that
this-
was the, just for everyone's listening, that's the window in which they evaluate student attendance to connect funding for students who attend that particular week.
And then the second FTE,
Is typically the second week in February.
second week in February. And also for clarity of those who are unfamiliar, when you mentioned that we don't know if the Department of Education is going to extend the ability of us to have what we currently have, which are the three options, right? Just for clarity's sake, and just so that those who are unfamiliar with this conversation understand that during the pandemic, the Department of Education issued a declaration, or whatever we want to call it, that allowed school districts to have options to provide for parents with regard to opening up the school districts in August, or this,
That is correct. There
this
has been-
school year. One of those had to be a brick and mortar, and all the others were pretty much up to local level officials to make that decision. We decided on three options. Some other districts do not have three options. Some other districts chose two options. We have three. We have the brick and mortar, we have the transitional, and then we also have full-time virtual. And,
That-
and
I'm
I'm sorry, I'll just finish right here. And then, just in case I or the audience get it wrong, the extension beyond, or rather, what we are currently working under should expire. Do we know when that should expire, and at what point do we not know if the Department of Ed will allow us an extension moving forward? Because current funding, I keep adding, I'm sorry, because current funding that we received for these options were meant for this particular purpose, to allow us to have these three options.
Through the chair, there has been absolutely no guidance provided from the state on this particular date, whether it be superintendent conference calls or memorandum regarding the continuation of that plan that was approved for the first semester.
Okay.
That is factual, as factual could be. As it relates to the flexibility of our particular plan, yes, we are offering those three options, one more option than most districts, providing opportunities for those parents to select an opportunity that they feel is best for them.
Mrs. Zork, may I?
A follow-up to this item that Mrs. Justice brought up.
I think
and then-
Mrs. Berenborg was
Then
waiting to.
Mrs. Berenborg is next, but Mrs. Justice has a follow-up to this.
No, I do not. I have
you
a
do not?
separate issue regarding
Okay.
the act, Dr. Moore, what are we calling this? This is the District Review of Health and Safety Measures Stage 1. Is this a different action plan? This is a Stage 1, so how does this pertain to the reopening plan, just so that I can speak to it properly?
Through the chair, this would be stage one. I initiated as my initial response to the information that was shared at our last board meeting. I capture that as the effective and continuous improvement of the current plan as it is written. I would see stage 2 as the opportunity to research, bring back information on the modifications and continuation of that plan as we move forward.
So you would see this as an amendment to the reopening plan, not taking the place of the reopening plan as far as action is concerned?
Through the chair, to be specific to that particular question, I would see it ultimately a recreation, an amendment to the particular plan. That is the plan that governs the systems that are in place for our response to operating schools within the midst of a pandemic. So once that direction is provided tonight, we go through that research to bring together what would move from a reopening plan. We've done that. We've improved that within stage 1. We now go through the process of what we continue to evaluate and determine how we continue to provide the most flexible options to educate children in the midst of a pandemic, create that particular plan, and then bring that back to the board.
Great. Mrs. Rourke, I have a question regarding that and some other issues, but I know Mrs. Barrenborg
Yes.
wants to speak to this, so.
Okay. Mrs. Barrenborg, then Mrs. Justice.
Right. I was going to ask about the fact that you devised a plan for us to reopen schools. And that had to be approved by the state. If we amend that or make a vote to change that plan tonight, will that also have to be approved by the state?
Yes.
Through the chair, I think it's important to note the Florida Department of Education, as it comes to health and safety, their encouragement is to follow your local health department, keeping it local to each particular of the county. The plan that was approved spoke specifically to our instructional models that we created and had it connected to funding. Mr. Meyer, anything in addition?
Can,
But can I ask,
Well, I want to ask Mrs. DeAgresta for her legal opinion on.
that didn't give me an answer. Okay.
So let me, before I go to Ms. DeGrasse to specifically
Yeah.
answer your question, the state asked and required us to work with our local health department regarding health and safety measures in the creation of that particular plan. The plan that we sent to the state, as you know, our state led the way in reopening our country, wanting students to come back into school. They required each of the 67 districts to submit a plan that first and foremost had an opportunity to return students to brick and mortar, respecting and honoring that is the most powerful and impactful way to educate children. And then the other option that you would have, clearly define what that option would be, and to create that plan within the time frame of the beginning of the school year through the end of December.
And again, would that have to be voted on or approved by the state?
Through the chair, no, it would not.
Okay, and so we are still under an emergency order from Governor DeSantis has an emergency order until November. Is that correct?
Through the chair, yes.
November 1st,
Thank you.
is that correct?
November 4th.
November 4th is the emergency
date.
plan, and it's going to expire then, correct?
Defer to the attorney if there's anything that I may have neglected to mention.
I mean, I think clarity on district requirement and creating the plan.
Mrs. Zork, the governor's executive order with regard to the state of emergency will expire November the 4th, November the 4th. 60 days from its execution.
But is the plan, in creating the plan, it's recommended to work with the health department, correct? But does the plan say you must work with the health department from the governor?
Which plan are you talking about?
The one that the school district,
Commissioner Corcoran's request
Yes.
okay.
is it a must or recommendation to work with the health department?
Okay, Commissioner Corcoran issued an emergency order for schools for school boards to develop a plan to reopen. And his emergency order included specific information that had to be included with regard to educational models, okay? And the template that was developed, I think it's an online template, but the template that was developed by the Department of Education focuses on your educational models, and it requires you to give 4, 5, 6, 7 assurances in implementing your educational models. So the Department of Education is focused on educational models. Other information in your reopening plan with regard to employee safety, with regard to student safety, with regard to all the other aspects of reopening an educational environment are at the local level. And what the Commissioner Corcoran's emergency order says is we are to reopen subject to the advice of federal, state, and local health officials or health departments. I'm not remembering the exact phrase that he uses, but the federal, state, and local health officials.
Is it specifically subject to advice?
If you can give me a moment, I'm happy
Okay.
to find it. I've got it here somewhere.
All right.
And while she looks, just as a quick update, Mr. Bass just spoke with the Vice Chancellor, Melissa Ramsey. No direction has been provided. We're only being held harmless for the FTE that just passed. So we're still
Can
pending.
you repeat that?
What I said was correct.
No, repeat. Just repeat the whole thing.
Mr. Bass just spoke with Melissa Ramsey, who is the Vice Chancellor. And we are only being held harmless for the FTE that just passed at this point. No additional information has been provided.
Mrs. Zork, I'd like to ask the superintendent
No,
speak into the microphone. Thank you. I'm sorry. Yes. So perhaps the information that I'm getting is new. It's an important part of our conversation. And I think Mrs. Rosario brought up some interesting points. It is an important part of the conversation, and I think we need some clarity on that moving forward. There are many districts that have chosen to make masks optional. My understanding is that there has been no indication to them that their funding would be truncated going forward. So I'm confused about that. I'm confused about why school board members, fellow school board members around the state of Florida will be making irresponsible decisions in that manner, not knowing how funding was going to be to make masks optional. So, and I don't think they would, honestly. So just some clarity on what
So
the
through the
direction is
chair,
going to be moving forward from the state.
To provide some clarity, what other districts are doing, or what other districts are doing, the size of those particular districts, the volume of students that return to brick and mortar are all dependent and variables that we do not have. Okay, can you take it and you just, maybe you can read that. So not knowing specifically what those other districts are doing, I can't speak specifically about the school district of Indian River County, the volume of students that we have in virtual options and what that impact would be as it relates to funding if we don't have that guidance provided. You're 100% correct. We should already have that information, which would make this an awkwardness a little bit easier to deal with. And if that information is accurate, I would love to have it as quickly as possible.
Me too, and I'll work to make that happen, but I obviously, as we all know, perhaps Mr. Meyer's connections are a little bit better in the education world than mine, and he'll be able to get that, but I'll do what I can to make that happen. Mrs. Zork, I have a question regarding, I just want to state, I have a question regarding option 2, so when we move on to another subject, I'd like to ask about that. Option
okay.
2, yes,
Okay.
the virtual model.
Mrs. Diagresta has clarification, then Mrs. Rosario. Mrs. Berenborg, I don't have Teams on my computer. Did you have?
You can pull up Teams.
No, I have it, but I'm afraid to pull it up because the volume, I'm not for sure where it is, and I don't want it to.
Mute it.
Oh.
You can mute it.
So I'm going to, Mrs. Diagresta, Mrs. Rosario, and then Mrs. Berenborg.
Thank you, Mrs. Zork. And this is Commissioner Corcoran's emergency order, It's 2020-EO-06, just so that we're clear which one I'm referring to. The fifth whereas clause, the document, it kind of tells a story at the beginning, and then it goes into specific directives, but the fifth whereas clause in the beginning is part of the setting the stage, if you will, says, whereas school openings must be consistent with safety precautions as defined by the Florida Department of Health, local health officials, and supportive of Floridians, young and adult, with underlying conditions that make them medically vulnerable. So that is one area where it is directing us to look to safety precautions as defined by the Department of Health. Then it goes into additional information, but in section Roman numeral 1, which is the reopening requirements, which is the section which is attached to the funding, A, subparagraph small a, and I apologize, I'm going to read you two sentences. Upon reopening in August, all school boards and charter school governing boards must open brick and mortar schools for at least 5 days per week for all students, subject to the advice and orders of the Florida Department of Health, local departments of health, Executive Order 2149, and subsequent executive orders. Then it goes on to say, absent these directives, the day-to-day decision to open or close a school must always rest locally with the board. And then it goes on to, or other executive, and they're discussing about charter schools or other types of schools that are operated. So those are the two areas in this particular emergency order that speak to looking to the Department of Health for advice and orders with regard to reopening schools and health requirements.
And through the chair, just for the board's consideration, as you read that and we consider a mass optional program, we would not be adhering to what Ms. DeGresta just read. We would not be going with the recommendation of the local health department. We would not be going with the recommendation of the State Department. We would be not doing that.
Can I follow up to Ms.?
I was going to go, didn't you
I
want?
want
Okay.
to this, and then Ms. Rosario. So what I was trying to get at was, subject to the advice, yes, I'm hearing that we're giving a suggested outline from our local health department, but what I was hearing in section 1A is it's subject to the advice, but yet the school board has ultimate authority to create the plan.
Absent directives from the Department of Health, local departments of health, and subsequent executive orders.
But does it say in there, if school boards do not take the advice of the local health department, that the plan won't be approved? Does it have anything like that?
No, I don't see any language that speaks specifically to that
Mrs. Sewell?
question.
A follow-up to that?
To the legal?
Yes. So you are in fact correct that we are under a health emergency in the state of Florida. And while the Department of Health does have jurisdiction over quarantining, they cannot in fact require masks to be used by students in our schools or patients in hospitals or anywhere else. They do not have that authority. And while I may agree or disagree with as that stands right now, is not the case. Statutes are enacted, are embraced by the community through the actions of elected representatives, that is representative government. I think it's important that we recognize where the authority lies with certain issues, and I feel that this board has a responsibility to our community to make sure that we are in full knowledge of where our authority lies with respect to changes we are able to make, and respecting the authority of other governing or regulatory or non-regulatory administrative organizations that may have an impact on our decision-making process.
Mrs. Rosario, Mrs. Barrenborn, and then Dr. Tiff. Is that okay?
Mrs. DeAgresta, I emailed you earlier with regard to clarification on the 60 days of the Department of Health's emergency extension. And I just need clarity on the order that you just read and stated that the extension or the deadline of the order that you just read from the governor, that expires on November 4th. Is that right?
Mrs. Rosario, the document that I was just reading from was Commissioner Corcoran's emergency order.
And that expires, you said, on November 4th. Is that correct?
No, Commissioner Corcoran's emergency order continues, as far as I've
Where did you get the November 4th? I heard you say something
No.
expires November 4th. What was that?
Yes, ma'am. That is the executive order, one of the executive orders issued by Governor DeSantis. If you think back in March, the beginning of March, he issued an executive order declaring a state of emergency in the state of Florida. Those types of executive orders only last for 60 days, and if the governor wishes to continue the state of emergency, he must reissue or renew the state of emergency, which he has done, and that the most recent renewal of the state of emergency expires on November the 4th. So I'm sorry if I'm confusing.
That's
two
okay.
separate offices. The governor and the commissioner of education are two separate. Everybody's issuing orders, I'm afraid.
That's okay, because I asked for clarification on a particular item today, and you told me that the deadline for expiration of the emergency extension was, in fact, I think you said October 27th.
Yes, the document that you asked me about in your email,
That was the Department of Health.
it's actually by the Surgeon General. In addition to the governor has authority, and he has issued many orders with regard to this emergency, the state of emergency, excuse me. In addition to that, the Surgeon General, who is our public health official in the state of Florida, also has his own authority with regard to emergencies, and his office issued something called a Declaration of Public Health Emergency, and he issued that also at the beginning of March. For him as well, these types of emergency orders only have a 60-day period that they're effective unless they are renewed. And so the document that you asked me about was the Surgeon General's Declaration of Public Health Emergency. The Surgeon General renewed his Declaration of Public Health Emergency on August 28th, and it's good for 60 days. Mm-hmm. So that means that it expires October
27th was the email.
Yes, it expires at the end of October 27, or to say it another way, it expires at midnight on October 28. So it's however you want to look at it, but all the way through October 27 is the Surgeon General's most recent Declaration of Public Health Emergency.
Okay, so we have these deadlines here, right, of which these emergency orders would expire unless they are extended.
Yes, ma'am.
Let's just say, hypothetically speaking, November 5th comes. No, let's just say October 28th comes. And on October 28th, if nothing has been extended, then would it be assumed that the Florida Department of Health would somehow default to not being, we would not be in a state of emergency if the current plan is not extended by October 28th?
I would agree with you.
Okay.
The Declaration of Public Health Emergency issued by the Surgeon General would expire, and we would no longer be operating under the Surgeon General's Declaration of Public Health Emergency.
Okay.
But that does not impact the governor's
Right.
executive order, which continues on for a few days beyond that.
Right. So the same question then would be, if on November 5th, nothing is extended with regard to the governor's order, then would it therefore be understood that likewise, the governor's orders of emergency, or where we are currently under that order, would then at that point no longer exist?
Yes, ma'am, I agree with you. Unless the governor does something to extend an executive order declaring an emergency, it will expire all on its own, and we will no longer be operating under a state of emergency. And the analogy that I just want to offer, because sometimes it's easier to think about things using an example, is if you think, knocking on a lot of wood, the hurricanes that we experience here in the state of Florida, and the governor's office routinely will issue a state of emergency to open up resources to address the emergency, the hurricane that's coming. And those orders that the governor's office or Governor DeSantis issues automatically expire 60 days unless he takes action to extend it. So it's just like when we're in a hurricane emergency. This COVID-19 is the process works the same.
Can I ask you a question?
This is still, this
I
is
just have a
still for Mrs. D'Agresta, please.
Of course.
Mrs. D'Agresta, the Florida Department of Health current declaration of emergency, the one that I forwarded to you this morning regarding
ma'am.
that one.
Yes, ma'am.
How many times has that one been extended? The governor's has been extended, I think, 2 or 3 times already. It started, I believe, in the spring, then it was extended in the summer, I believe 3 times really, and then at the end of August. Can you tell me about the Florida Department,
It's
please?
actually listed in the actual Declaration of Public Health Emergency,
there it is.
thankfully, because otherwise I was going to have to dig through my stack. But it was initially issued on March the 1st. And in the second paragraph, the Surgeon General says that he renewed the declaration on April 30th. So it was issued March the 1st. He renewed on April 30th. He renewed it on June 29, and he's now renewed it on August 28th. So
August 28th.
4 separate, 1 initial order and then 3 renewals at the moment.
So I'm just thinking out loud here. It seems that October 28th and November 4th are pretty much almost right around the corner, right? We don't really know if these orders are going to, okay, my last question for you, Mrs. D'Agresta. If we do not hear anything by October, you've already answered with regard to the health by October 28th and November 5th. From November 5th moving forward, would it be, could it be assumed that everything should basically go back to normal? There's no state of emergency. The governor, I mean, this could be hypothetical, but legally, could it be assumed that everything is back to normal?
Yes, if all of the emergency orders, executive orders, declarations, if all of that expires and nothing is renewed, then we are back, just like hurricane season has now ended, we are back operating just like we were before. It would be the same for this situation. We would be able to go back and do as we have done before.
Okay. So I know I keep saying my last, but I think it's very important. If it's assumed by November 5th, hypothetically, nothing has been extended, everything should, again, hypothetically go back to normal, where would we stand as a district with the mask issue at that point? As a local body, would we then have to take masks completely off the table? Or would we then, considering that we're still dealing with health concerns, legally be in our right to ask for the masks to be optional at that point? Because I'm assuming that we can't make them mandatory after November 5th if nothing has been extended. What is your legal opinion on that?
Of course. So we would not be operating under any type of a state of emergency. And so we would revert back, if you will. That's a bad way to say it, but we would simply go back to the statutory authority of school boards that has been in place forevermore, with regard to your operation and control of public education. And under your constitutional authority and your statutory authority, it's not, and I don't want to say just, it's not just teaching students, but it's the entire umbrella of public education that also addresses the health safety of students while they're with us. So it's educational curriculum piece as well as health safety of students. So just like you currently have board policies that address how students behave on campus, how employees behave on campus, what they can and cannot do, it would be the same process moving forward if this board wished to have a discussion about revising your code of student conduct or any of your current board policies with regard to health safety. You could have that discussion and we would implement a rulemaking process for it.
All right.
So, not for Mrs. D'Agresta, but just to kind of bring this to a close with these, with the answers that Mrs. D'Agresta gave us and the state of conversations that we have been having. It appears that there is some question with regard to financial liabilities that we may or may not face, specifically with FTE, as was just mentioned. I know Dr. Moore is going to work on trying to get something in writing. I know what I hear is Mrs. Justice also said that she would work on trying to get something in writing as well.
I don't have anyone
Considering-
working for me right now to go do it, but
Well-
when we're done, I will, yeah.
Considering the fact that we may or may not have an extension to the current orders that are in place, November 4th is right around the corner. We're going to blink and it's going to be there. I think where we are right now, if it's, I think that it is important for us to move forward in the conversations in part with what we have on the table with some of the revisions of our current plan. But I would ask the board right now to consider holding off on the vote of the masks until we know further what we're going to do, or until we hear further by November 4th if these orders are going to be extended or not, because then our discussions tonight are going to be totally in vain. Community might be up in a roar. You know, we're going to cause confusion, what we're doing, what we're not going to do. We don't really know. By November 5th, all of this could be off the table and we revert back to normal. And then we don't have to vote on anything. Or at that point, we might move to making masks optional because there is no emergency order. So because it's November 4th is right around the corner, I'm just going to ask the board to pause tonight's vote on masks, just on the masks portion, not on anything else, until November 4th. And at that point, I would ask Dr. Moore to put on the agenda an emergency, because our next meeting is not until, I think, the 17th, which November, I don't know when then.
26. We have one meeting
After
prior
November
to
4th.
that date in which you're referencing.
Okay, so maybe November 5th, there could be a meeting, an emergency meeting that we can have where you can call all the board members together, and at that point, we can immediately decide what we are going to do with regard to the masks. If there are no extensions to the current plans, then so be it, and then we'll work on whatever we're going to work on at that point. But right now, I think it would be helpful for us to consider that. Madam Chair?
I have some questions and comments to that, but I'm going to open it up to Mrs. Berenborg, and then and we can all swing back to that, and then Dr. Schiff has some questions and comments. Go ahead, Mrs. Berenborg.
Yes, there are more items on the agenda tonight than just removing masks immediately. The agenda item that I placed up there was to provide direction for the superintendent to create a plan towards moving for when the emergency order is over. I don't think it's fair for us to wait until November 5th and then say to the superintendent, okay, we got to make a decision, unmask kids tomorrow. I think we would cause anarchy in our schools if we did that. I think we need to ask him to devise a carefully thought out plan to move forward. And that's the item that I placed on there that we can discuss, talking about how to devise that plan, or how to agree that we agree that he devise a plan.
May I? The one thing that I did say was that we should talk about all other items that were on tonight's agenda. I did. What I suggested was that we don't vote tonight on whether we are for, against, or optional, that decision should not be on tonight's agenda because we don't know what may happen. But everything
Okay.
else would remain status quo. And yes, we should talk about what that would look like moving forward. And yes, we should give the superintendent direction on everything else that is on our agenda tonight. That was the only suggestion that I mentioned.
Okay, Mr. Zari, but you did say that we should wait until November 5th. I don't think we should wait
To-
for a plan until that long. That's what I'm stating. That's the only difference.
Dr. Schiff, then Ms. Schiff.
Yeah, I'm going to be really brief. As I see it, my job here and our job here is to follow law, statute, executive order, and health science. Everything that Mrs. DeGresta has said says that it's my job to follow the rules that are set out to follow the governor's orders, to follow the Surgeon General's orders, to follow the Department of Health right now, and that there is some room for local decision-making beyond that. But under the state of emergency, as I hear it, we are directed to follow certain experts. And so my authority here is not the same as my expertise. My authority to make those decisions, I don't confuse with my expertise to make those decisions. Right now, I cannot see myself in a position where I feel like I have the expertise to go against the recommendations of the Department of Health. I'm not sure why we would do that. I support what Mrs. Rosario is suggesting, that there are unknown variables in this. And I think what we do is, as Mrs. Berenborg has suggested, we create a plan for what happens given these scenarios that we right now don't know. We don't know. The governor has extended the emergency order a number of times now. He may or may not extend that November 5th. That may change the scenario under which we're operating. The Surgeon General may change the recommendations. We don't know. And I agree with you. We are now in a point where we are 2 weeks away from what may be significant changes in mandate for what we can and can't do. And I think it's, I'm not going to use that word. It's also true that in Florida right now, we have the highest per capita cases of positive tests for COVID-19. We have the highest COVID-19 I'm looking at the CDC website in front of me. We have the highest deaths per 100,000. I don't feel like I am in a position to second guess the CDC, the Department of Health, the Surgeon General, nor the governor, who has issued an executive order right now. So I support actually what Mrs. Rosario is suggesting about delaying a vote on optional masking. I also support what Mrs. Berenborg is suggesting about directing the superintendent to create a plan for how we move forward in the safest and healthiest way for our students, our teachers, our staff, and everyone in this community. That's all I got for now.
Yes, I'd like to move on, if I could, to the option 2 discussion that I'd
Can
like to
I-
have regarding the action plan. Of course, Mrs. Work, please do. I might have something to add if you have something that you'd like to
So
bring up.
you're wanting to move on to option 2. I'm still trying to get clarity on this of something that you brought up that I didn't catch that has me pausing here. So what I'm hearing now that I've not heard before, I've heard liability, as legal liability, but I have not heard, this is the first time I'm hearing of liability from the Department of Education of holding our funds, is what I'm hearing through FTE.
That's what I was told today.
Madam Chair, you're asked to speak into your mic.
I can't sit here with my mouth into the mic. It's just not practical.
Bring it closer to you.
No, she doesn't have the higher thing.
So what I'm trying to understand, even if what I have reservations about, even if Mrs. Rosario, you brought forward a very practical idea of a phase-in plan at the last meeting, which now is on the agenda under Mrs. Berenborg. My question is, if I'm hearing that we're not going to receive our FTE funding if we go optional mask, your plan of phasing in option doesn't even apply. So I'm having some reservations here.
I think the confusion is that I think we're confounding two different things. And I don't believe that FTE may or may not be a worry for
factor.
us because of masks. Masks do not determine FTE. That does not, one thing does not have anything to do with the other. So whether we decide on masks or not decide on masks, mandatory or optional, that doesn't determine our funding. What determines our funding are our school options. So the school options now, and I'll defer to Mr. Meyer, Mr. Bass, or Dr. Moore on this, and even Mr. Fagan. The school funding for the options that we have now with regard to the brick and mortar, the transitional, and the full-time virtual, that is what we are currently covered under and what we received extra funding from the state for, not masks. So we shouldn't confound those two. We should understand that it's the school options, the three, the option 1, option 2, option 3, or option A, B, C, whatever it is that we have. Those three. If we no longer have an emergency extension, then it's possible we may not get extra funding to continue the transitional or to continue the full-time virtual, not masks.
Okay.
Does that kind of make sense?
So-
Am I right?
Through the chair, 100%.
Thank you.
So, Mrs. Rosario, you bring up some very good points, and you asked my opinion, but I wanted to wait
Yeah.
until everyone had their turn. But something that I would like to propose, if we are going to look at putting the decision off on the planning of the phase out, is I can bring an outline in, because I have it on my phone, but I can bring the printed outline tonight. Something I would like to propose, since we are talking about what's in the best interest of all students, and something that, as a parent, I've noticed is that I believe that the school district should have something that they should post and let the students fully aware of what their rights are in regards to mask wearing. So what I would like to propose in supporting your pause, but also propose that we have a School District of Indian River County student mask rights and roles of what's expected of our teachers and staff and what's expected of our students with the mask, and that be posted in every classroom, hallway, bathroom, and on our website, and that it also include, and just keep in mind this is a draft I was working on today, is that it highlights the right to ask for a mask break, and accommodations must be granted. Number 2, no student will be denied a group time mask break for any reason. Number 3, students are permitted to remove masks when social distancing of 6 feet is possible. Number 4, teacher cannot deny removal of mask if only a portion of the students, which goes back to your point that you brought up, Dr. Moore, on on independent centers. So if we, this one here, students cannot deny removal of mask. If a portion of the students, for example, are in student centers who are socially distanced, but another portion of the students who can't be socially distanced, those students cannot be denied, which is happening and has happened, because the entire class, what I was told was, it's not fair if one student can take it off and the other can't. So the rights of that student is that, yes, this rule should not be interpreted as an all or none rule. Number 5, another right of the students, masks are optional for students during PE and or recess and or if social distancing. I think that needs to be highlighted in what the students understand. Number 6, if you are, and this is important when we're talking about health and safety, for students to understand if they're feeling lightheaded, dizzy, or nauseous, because we know some students do experience this with masks. You must notify your teacher of these symptoms. And what I am finding out is that there are quite a few students that are being sent to the office for upset stomach and also headache, which can also be a symptom that is being caused from wearing an extended mask. But that student must understand that they have the right to notify the teacher that they are feeling that way, but that doesn't mean they need to be sent home for a COVID test, because that's just a symptom of wearing a prolonged mask. And then also in part of the rights that should be posted for the students to understand, if they feel that they've been denied any of these rights, they need to have a hotline number that doesn't go to the principal, doesn't go to the school, but it needs to go to a district office that that student can report. Are you on it?
No,
I see you.
I was just mouthing Mr. Seymour.
Yes, exactly. That's what I have here, but I didn't want to limit you on who you chose. I do actually have call Eric Seymour with school time and class, so that when we talked the other day, we talked about we need to know more identifiable information, because not all are doing this, but we need to recognize who is still not applying our school board policy. So Mrs. Rosario, I would be in support of what you're bringing forward, but I do feel that our students need a very clear understanding of what their rights are in wearing these masks, so that we can continue to protect them under situations that I've seen that not all are applying our school board policy.
Madam Chair, I think you are right. I think we do need that, and I would completely support that. However, I would ask, Madam Chair, if you could please give Dr. Moore 30 seconds to put up on the screen something that I was going to share. I sent it to your email. Something that I was going to share with you all tonight, but it fits perfectly into this conversation, if you don't mind. And this way, everybody would be able to see it. I did make copies for you all, but it really fits in well with, if you can allow the 30 seconds for us to do that.
So we're going to go on, and then we'll come back. And I was actually going to print mine out and bring it tonight, but I felt it fit pretty good in here. So
Yep.
go ahead.
Thank you, Mrs. Zork. Tonight I have 3 action items on the agenda. The first is a vote to make masks optional. The second is a vote by this school board to no longer require mass quarantining of students who are wearing masks in classrooms. And the third is to ask the school board to ask for an injunction from a local judge, to seek an injunction from a local judge to halt the mass quarantines that the Florida Department of Health in Indian River County is forcing upon our students. I want to have a very real conversation, if I could, with my board members for a moment, and I want to make it clear to our parents in this community, as I understand it, we cannot deny your child an education because they choose to not wear a mask or because you choose not to put one on them. We have absolutely no right in this district to require a student to wear a mask. We cannot deny your child an education because they can't or won't wear a mask. Putting children into the situation where they must be advocates for themselves within our school
is a very tricky situation. Most elementary school students are taught to be compliant and to conform to what's being expected of them in the classroom. Asking a student to be an advocate for their mental health and safety, especially at the young elementary age, is really not something I'm comfortable with requiring as a school board member. And in no other circumstance would we question the validity of a child's concern about their mental health or a parent's concern about their child's mental health than it seems in this moment, in the many emails that I have read, our children's mental health and the validity of our assessment as a parent is being questioned. I am very uncomfortable with putting students into the situation where they must go against what they deem as authority to assert their rights. It's not fair. The health department does have the authority to require quarantines of our students, and they do have the authority to recognize or to recommend or to tell us, really, which students need to be quarantined. It's important to understand where their authority lies. That is where their authority lies. I am asking this school board to take legal action against the Florida Department of Health to halt mass quarantines of healthy students. Of the 459 students that we have quarantined since the beginning of school, not one student has tested positive for COVID after having been in contact with another student on a campus. That is an important fact that cannot be ignored. So when we want to talk about health science data, that is a point that must be considered. We are denying students access to their education. We do not have a virtual or transitional model in place currently for quarantined students. Quarantined students access Canvas, and it is at the discretion of the teacher as to what they put onto Canvas. In many cases, it was classwork that must be completed for a grade, and that is the end of instruction. I am familiar with a case of a student at Vero Beach High School that was quarantined for 2 weeks, returned for 1 day, and was quarantined again for 2 weeks. A healthy child who never tested positive for COVID. Mrs. Barenborg, I am sorry that you are not feeling well today, and I hope that the result of your COVID test will be negative. I think the fact that your COVID test being negative and that you will feel comfortable coming here is a sign that you have confidence in the test. My daughter, no symptoms, was quarantined from school last Wednesday. The student that she had been in contact with had not been in school since October 1st. On the Thursday, I believe October 7th, I took her for a COVID test the day after she was quarantined. She was negative. I received a call from the health department letting me know that my child's name and information had been given to them because she had been identified as possibly being in contact with someone who had tested positive for COVID. I was told that a negative test was not enough for her to be able to return to school that following day. I asked about the following Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday of this week, and I was told that also a negative test was not enough for my daughter to return to school. There are certain things that the health department is allowed to do. Quarantining our students in that way is one of those things. When I asked what would happen if she went to try to attend school, I was told by the health department that we have law enforcement officers and other personnel at the school that would block her access. It's extremely concerning to me that we would deny a student who has tested negative for COVID, access to their education, as it is our job to ensure that every child receives a free and appropriate public education. So again, I state, this is not Tiffany Justice's opinion about whether masks are valid, whether they work, or whether or not someone should wear them. It is purely that we don't have the right to make students wear masks. And I continue to say it, and no one questions it, because it's the truth. Mrs. Zork, I will be bringing the vote tonight because it has been made evident to me that our students, the parental rights of our minor, of parents, the parental rights of their minor children are being violated, of the parents in our district. And it is incumbent upon this board to do their duty and to ensure that those rights are protected. When you feel it is appropriate, I would like to move on to option 2 of our reopening plan for discussion.
Thank you. Mrs. Barrenborg?
Yes, I do also have an item about the health department and what I see as an overreach. It's a little different than what Mrs. Justice was just describing, but I do want to make one distinction. I have not been near someone that was positively identified with COVID. I am sick. I had 2 of the symptoms, therefore got the test, and I'm waiting the results. My doctor gave me the advice to stay home until my test results come back. That is what I'm doing. I'm following my doctor's advice, okay? So let me have that distinction. I have not been near someone that was positive through my knowledge, okay? But I did put an item up there to talk about the overreach, because I have heard when we are creating a plan with conjunction with the health department, and we have that plan in place, and we've agreed to these things. And then when a child is tested positive, it is my understanding through conversations with different parents that are very, very frustrated that their child was quarantined, even though it really wasn't within our plan. That is what I'm talking about with the overreach. You know, if the child is within 6 feet for extended amount of time, I can understand that. But we're doing all the things they've asked us to do. Masks, separating as much as possible, and, you know, identifying kids that were within a certain amount of time, and yet that is being superseded. So that's the part that I'm frustrated with and I call that overreach. And again, the health department does have the right to do this during an emergency order. The question is, at what point?
Okay,
Do you want me to?
you have,
No, through the chair, and this is information that we continue to talk about for the last several weeks. And I mentioned during my presentation at our meeting last Tuesday that the 450 now, over 450 that have been quarantined, 0 have come back positive. And I think we have created opportunities to ensure students continue to be engaged in instruction when the unfortunate quarantine happens, by having the lessons in Canvas. But as I have said multiple times, nothing replaces the power and impact of an educator in a classroom with his or her students. That is the goal, to return as many students as possible. And not that I would want any one person ever to test positive for COVID, but I think the fact that 0 of the individuals who willingly didn't want to, but said, okay, I understand, I will be quarantined. And it is unfortunate because there are students who have been in contact, or no fault of theirs, because of the seating assignment. They sit next to a student and were quarantined, come back, they're excited to come back, and lo and behold, it happens the 2nd or 3rd day, and that is extremely unfortunate. And we continue to work with and enhance the quality of lessons for students that are being placed on Canvas and getting those lessons to students. In looking at the legalities, I will obviously defer to our school board attorney regarding what would be the next steps as the items are written. I thought it was my responsibility to work with staff to coordinate or request a meeting to review the current protocols that are in place. There are protocols, their determination as it relates to quarantine. And I will always be driven by data and speak to the data. this data tells us we're doing a lot of things correctly because it's working. And whether it is overreach or whether it is an abundance of caution, I understand the authority, but I think as a result of getting this meeting scheduled, which I would hope would take place this week, a true opportunity to engage with the health department regarding the current reality, the systems and structures that we're working together to implement to reduce the number of quarantines. I think we have demonstrated to everyone involved that what we're doing does work, and I do think there are opportunities really to look at it and challenge to see if we can't come to a common ground about reducing the number of students that are quarantined. Mr. Bass, is there anything that you would add to that?
Through the chair. I think there are opportunities. Going into this and speaking directly to you guys as to how this was going to happen was one idea, and then when the actuality of it happening is a different one. And when we go in, we are so far ahead as far as getting information, providing that to the team, the health department team, to do the investigation. I feel like that has reduced some of the numbers of quarantines also, because if there is a question in their mind, they're going to say, we're going to quarantine the room. But by us going ahead and getting ahead of that, that has helped drastically. And I haven't said a whole lot about this, and I know that we don't want to compare ourselves to other districts, particularly in the quarantine phase. Ms. Barenborg brought it up, but I will just, if you will enlighten me for just a second, I will tell you a example of why I think our quarantining is working. In my former district, masks are not mandatory. They're recommended to wear during transportation and when transitioning in classrooms. You can wear them in the classroom if you would like. There was an outbreak at that school, at one of the schools in my former district. 2.9% of the students tested positive. As a result of that and lax mask wearing, you had a total of 5 staff members, adult staff members, who were throughout the campus, but all had interactions with those students. Additionally, you had 6 adults in the community that can be traced back to the outbreak at school who got sick. 6 adults who were in the hospital being sick. One of which my father-in-law. Teacher, 30 plus years, healthy 62-year-old man in the hospital for over 2 weeks. At our board meeting last Tuesday, I got a text message. One of the individuals who also was in the hospital died that night. And I feel like that, and in talking to the superintendent in that district now, felt like if the masks were utilized better, they could have prevented some of that. And I realize it's not the kids. It's not the kids who are getting sick from COVID. But this just, for me, this is personal, because these are the people that I worked with for 26 years. And to see what they're going through and see what that community, a small community, is going through right now, it's troubling to me. And I have not lived here that long, but I'm here. I've drank the water. I'm here. These students are my students, and these families are my families. And if we are, rights, inconveniencing, whatever we're doing, I want to make sure that our students are safe and their parents are safe at home, and I also want to make sure that our staff is safe. And Ms. Zora, you bring up some good points. There are some good things in there in what you said. And I think there is an opportunity here to work together to get to that. But I I strongly feel like just masks being optional right now is not the right avenue to go. I feel like if we did that, we would see more quarantines. And it is very unfortunate that your child or any child gets quarantined from sitting next to someone else in school. But I look at the alternative or the possibility of what could happen and see again what is occurring and has occurred in my district and know that is why we've got these measures in place. Sorry, I didn't mean to get off on that, but I just felt it was,
Mrs.
I wanted to share it.
Mrs. Ork, may I address that, please? I've been waiting to speak.
Yes, and then is your item ready, Mrs. Rosario?
Yes,
Do you know?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay.
But I also
Mrs.
wanted
Justin?
to respond to that as well.
Mr. Bass, I just want to say, Dr. Moore, I'm sorry. Are you leaving, or could you stay with us for a moment? Thank you, sir. Mr. Bass, I'd like to say I'm so sorry to hear about your father-in-law being ill and about some of the illness that is going on in your community and of Glades County. I'm very sorry for that. In many conversations that I've had with the superintendent regarding making masks optional, I have proposed amending the motion to put into place a time period that would allow for a plan to be created, recognizing that it is not our job as school board members to tell Dr. Moore how to accomplish some tasks. It is his job as the expert, as he said he was, the humble expert in his field, to define for us what measures need to be taken to create a safe learning environment for our students. I recognize and agree with you that a safe learning environment for our students is very important. I would ask you to go back and reflect on Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, a horrible day in the history of Florida schools, where a young man entered a school and killed many students. I believe more students than have died from COVID in the state of Florida. And on that day, many things changed regarding safety and security in schools. And one of the things that was very interesting to me was the way that where authority lied for the decision-making process within each individual school district. And there was some confusion as to things such as the Guardian program, how they would be implemented, who would have the authority to implement that. Would it be the sheriff? Would it be the school district? Who would be managing it? Many, many questions. But the ultimate authority for the safety and security of students in our schools was left with the school board. The school board was able to direct how we approached that situation. I have been public in saying that I would not have supported the Guardian program as it was originally, as they originally tried to instate it. I did not feel comfortable with many of the variables of the Guardian program. Obviously politics get involved in a lot of the many things that we do, and politics did get involved in that situation. And I think it's important to note that, again, the school board really did have the ultimate authority in the decision-making process through executive session as to how we move forward in guaranteeing the safety and security of our students. In this situation, the rights of our parents and students are important. I do not want to see anyone get sick in this community. I was raised here. I've been here since I was 7 years old. I've gone to school here. My children go to school here. My children's friends go to school here. Their parents teach in our school district. I think we have amazing teachers and amazing students, as Dr. Moore said, and I'm very proud of the leadership of this district and this board, to be honest with you, in some very bold decision-making, which I will continue to support as a school board member throughout my term and as a parent of 4 children in our public school system. I do also think that one of the primary things that we have to do is ensure that every child is receiving an education. And currently, as it stands right now, we are not able to make that claim. That is not the case. Keeping a healthy student out of high school for 4 weeks with limited instruction and support and guidance is unacceptable to me as a school board member. Mrs. Rosario has some things she'd like to share. Again, I'd like to go back to option 2 when we have a moment. Thank you.
Mrs. Rosario, is this your item up here?
Yes, ma'am, but I also made copies, so I'll pass it. I've already collated, they're not stapled, but
Yeah,
you
I
can just
can't-
take
I
one.
can't read
And I
that.
believe I have an extra one for Nancy as well. This is, I do believe I sent it to Mr. Bass and Mr. Meyer this morning, and if I did not, I certainly will when we are done.
Could somebody send it to me, please?
I did, I just sent it to Nancy
you.
to send it to you. I don't want to send it to you directly because I don't want any accusations of violating sunshine. So if Mrs. Barrenborg, if you can just give Nancy another minute before she can send it to you, that would be great. But in the meantime, Madam Chair, I just wanted to respond to what Mr. Bass mentioned. Mr. Bass, I'm sorry to hear about your colleagues in your district where you worked. I will tell you, though, board members, that I had a conversation last night with a very good friend of mine, I would dare say a best friend of mine, who is an assistant principal in Port St. Lucie. And she is at one of the high schools there, very, very big high school in Fort Pierce. I asked her some questions about how St. Lucie is handling their mask policies, and she says very similar to us. Their masks are mandatory. Everybody has to wear a mask. No one seems to be presenting any problems with it, with the exception that the first round of students who, in her particular school, would be equivalent to our transitional, they are called My School. They called their transitional program My School. So the first round of students from their My School, from this particular school that my friend works at, began coming in, and apparently there has been an outbreak in this particular school, one of which wound up that my friend got COVID as an assistant principal and literally just completed her quarantine and her illness a week ago. She's still dealing with side effects, and she has not been 100%. We just talked last night for the first time in many weeks because of this. I asked her her opinion as an assistant principal in this huge high school. I told her that we are going to be talking about masks, and I said, "What do you think?" And she said, "Absolutely not." The only reason why there aren't more, in her personal opinion, more people in her school building with COVID, particularly now that there is an outbreak, more of an outbreak, she believes because there are masks. Now, again, this is just her humble opinion as an employee there. This is not her medical opinion. This is her humble opinion. And I thought it would be important for me to share because we as elected, I don't take this position lightly. I take this position very seriously. And as an elected official, it's our job to be the voice of the people who elected us. The problem here is that I'm hearing equally on both sides to wear masks, not to wear masks. So how do you rightly make that decision? Well, it doesn't, we have to somehow come in the middle somewhere, somehow, because it wouldn't be right for me to vote one or the other personally. This is my personal struggle because I see the benefits of both. And you all know, there is no one on this board who would advocate more for school choice and for parental voice than me as a homeschool mom. It is my decision what happens to my son. It is my decision what school, what educational route my child will take, and I believe every parent has that right. But at the same time, the children in this school district are attending a public school. And as public officials, I believe that it is important, critical for us to receive all of the information that we can receive so that we can make the best educated decision, not an emotional decision, not a personal decision, but the right decision. So whether that might be for masks, against masks, or optional masks at this point, you know, we shouldn't even honestly be having this conversation right now. Right now, I think the discussion of masks is way too premature, and I think that we should have been having this conversation about masks much later, after our transitional students have returned into brick and mortar schools. That's when I think we should be having, or maybe just before. My hope is that we would have by now understood, and maybe Dr. Moore will be able to give us more of that information later this evening, how many of our transitional students have already entered brick and mortar, and then by what date approximately are we looking at more of those transitional students? If we had about 80% of our transitional students re-enter brick and mortar schools, we'll be able to see, how does that really work? How is that actually on ground zero? What does that look like in the classrooms? Are they able to social distance? Because if they're not able to social distance, then no one's going to be able to take the mask off. If they're able to social distance, then we're back at our opening school plan and everybody continues along their way. Happy-go-lucky. The other issue that we just mentioned before is the fact that we don't know what's going to happen come November 5th, if the extension is going to be here or not. So we're still in this world of a lot of variables unknown. That said, in my research, what you all have in front of you was something that I thought was pretty incredible, which I thought, Madam Chair, I think it works well with what you're suggesting. Maybe this is the conversation that we should have been having tonight, but I think that something like this, from what I hear from Mrs. Justice, there are some concerns with regard to students who are quarantined, who are not receiving instruction equal to everyone else.
Right.
So if that is a concern, I think that is something that we need to bring to the superintendent's attention this evening and direct the superintendent to edit the current revision so that we can make sure that every child is receiving equal educational opportunities, whether they are quarantined or not. I think there was something else that was mentioned with regard to the quarantine of who gets quarantine, identified quarantine students. If the identified quarantine students are not actually the ones who should be quarantined and some others are being quarantined, then that's something we should also address with the superintendent tonight as we look into revising the current plan that we currently have to ensure that only those that are supposed to be quarantined are actually quarantined. Thirdly, I think that, in my humble opinion, we do not have as high numbers as we probably others are, is probably because we're wearing masks, and maybe because we are quarantined. I don't know. Lastly, lastly, in front of you, you have a chart. This was provided on the CDC website. It is a really accessible chart that could give direction to the superintendent as well to add or to be, tweaked, I suppose, edited, I suppose, to fit our needs in particular. Where there is a possible student scenario, for example, on the first line, it says students are seated less than 6 feet apart. And then the identified check would be there. In this case, it's masks are recommended. If you go down to the third, students are seated at least 6 feet apart in the classroom. I'm sorry, the first one was on buses. I apologize. The first one was on buses. The second one that I just read, students are seated at least 6 feet apart in the classroom. That is checked off, masks may be considered. right? And I think this, from what I understood from what you were saying, Madam Chair, in your suggestions, is that what you were suggesting were really good ideas that could fit within this kind of model, where we are specifically giving direction. We're giving the superintendent guidance here, but we're also allowing for the direction of the schools to see what would be allowed to wear masks, when it's possible, when it's not possible, that sort of thing. And then, of course, the next pages allow for other scenarios, one of which indicates student has a disability. For example, childhood mental health conditions, sensory concern, tactile sensitivity. In this chart, it says masks are recommended. If you look at the bullets for additional considerations in that area, it says administrators and/or teachers should consult with parents, caregivers, and guardians about strategies to protect these children and those around them. Adding a provision as that is written like that would really empower our parents to feel like they're making the decision for their child. There isn't an overreach in that particular case, that we are all working together in the best interest of children. Now, I know that you all just received this, and it would be unfair of me to assume that you all have an opinion on this right now, but Madam Chair, if it would be appropriate, maybe this could be something we could all kind of mull over within the next couple of hours and continue our conversation this evening as we move into some of the items that Mrs. Berenborg has on the table for a vote. We could possibly bring this as well to the table to combine all of our, collective juices on that matter. Lastly, if I may, Numerous Children's Health Center System, the hospital here in Florida, they have put out, and I asked Nancy to send it out to you all, considerations for teachers and staff during the COVID-19 pandemic. It is dated August 24th, 2020, and they said that if there were any updates, they would have updated their system. Thus far, there are no other updates, which leads me to believe that everything is still status quo with their opinion. Numerous indicates that first, frontline educators face their greatest risk of acquiring SARS-CoV-2 infection, not from children at school, but from adults at school and from family members and friends outside of school. Put simply, for acquiring SARS-CoV-2 infection, the riskiest room in the school is not the classroom, but the teacher's lounge. Furthermore, the infection risk of frontline educators stems less from contact with children at school and more from contacts with family members and adults outside of the school. And second, masks, social distancing, and hand washing are effective for preventing SARS-CoV-2 transmission. All three must be practiced and enforced consistently. So though we are discussing the mask issue, and I think it is an important one for us to discuss, again, like I said earlier, I think it's a little too premature for us to be discussing that now. I do have a personal opinion to go and move towards the optional choice. I just don't know if now is the right time. I do not believe that we should be talking about option right now. However, I thought it was very important to mention this, and there are plenty of other pieces of information that are mentioned in here with regard to the universal masking. That could also be something that we could include in our suggestions to Dr. Moore to revise the current plan that we have so that we are not making decisions off the cuff.
Thank you very much.
Mrs.
Mrs. Rosario.
Berenborg. After you, Mrs. Barrenborg.
Thank you. Mrs. Rosario, you bring up some good points. I appreciated you sharing that with us yesterday. I think this document is a wonderful example of some conflicting information. One of the things that the document states that you sent to us is that the Center of Disease Control and Prevention, what it states in that document is that they define exposure as within 6 feet without a mask. Actually, in that document, it says they define exposure as 6 feet without a mask. So currently, as it stands right now, the Department of Health is quarantining students in our classrooms who are within 6 feet of positive cases of COVID, who are wearing masks. So the overreach of the health department in this against the recommendation of doctors, and this comes from the Governmental Affairs Agency of Nemours. So, while I appreciate the information, everyone, that they have an agenda just like everyone else in this, and that's just the truth. When you say it's premature to be discussing these things, I don't know when the time is. If the emergency order is lifted, we will be thrown into a state of masks truly being completely optional, and we will have done no prior planning. So I appreciate, I was not aware of Mrs. Barrenborg's action items to be added. I was only aware of my own. I appreciate Mrs. Barrenborg's action items that she's added. My next question I pose is for Dr. Moore. Dr. Moore, in conversations regarding my motion, the motion about making masks optional, we discussed various amendments that could be made regarding giving you a period of time in order to accomplish a plan that would make this feasible, because I have been very sensitive, Mrs. Rosario, about the chaos that perhaps an immediate decision could have, the impact it would have on our teachers and our students and our families. I am sensitive to that. I do understand it. I don't think that it's ever premature to talk about the rights of citizens of the United States. It's what makes our country very, very unique, and I will continue to advocate for parental rights, as I know you do too. But Dr. Moore, when we discussed amendments to this motion of giving you time in order to create a plan, can you give a little information to the board as to how you spoke to that and what our conversations were like?
Through the chair, absolutely, Ms. Justice. In looking at creating a timeline, I think it is my responsibility as superintendent to create what would best be defined as gating criteria. What would be the criteria that would be established in order to begin the process of phasing out masks when we reach X percent of percent positive on a weekly basis? The amount of PPE that is available, the revisions of this plan in place and operating effectively would be some examples of we put these measures in place, we implement these particular measures, and we define locally what criteria for us locally would be established before we begin to implement the phase-out pathway. And then provide that pathway to the board in concert, in collaboration, in its creation as it relates to what is the appropriate process. So defining when it would be appropriate to begin the phase-out process, as Ms. Rosario initially called it. So my recommendation would be to take the time to create, this is the criteria that the medical experts define. This is the time frame when we hit that particular area, whether it be in a week or whether it be in 2 months, and we have certain fidelity of implementation with current programs in place. That means, yeah, we're ready to go to the next level, which would be a very comprehensive phase-out plan. And I think if we are able to accomplish that, we don't have to wait on the state. We don't have to wait on anything else. We're just ready to implement, whether it be in a month or 2 months, once we create the criteria, and then ultimately the pathway that we would take to move towards the next steps.
Mrs.
Madam Chair.
Thank you. So in conversation, you had some concerns about putting some type of a time frame on it in simple terms, and would you agree that that is the case?
Through the chair, yes,
So
I
you
would
had some
be,
concerns about me amending my motion to put a time frame on it? Okay, a specific time frame. So, Dr. Moore, in conversation with you, we've talked about a couple different things. We've talked about the quarantining. I have a real concern about the quarantining. I mean, we have masked children that are within 6 feet, but they're wearing masks, and we're still quarantining them, and that's going in the face of, the Florida Department of Health has the authority to do that, and whether or not we think that's right, apparently there are some doctors and scientists who don't think it's right, but they don't seem to care. They have the authority to do it, so they are. Dr. Moore, in your opinion, just out of curiosity, and you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but do you think if the health department had the authority to require masks on all of our students full-time, that they would require that?
yeah, that is their recommendation.
Their recommendation is that all students are masked full-time. I understand that. And I would say to our community, absolutely, if you can wear a mask and you're doing well with a mask and you can wear it to keep other people safe, every time I enter a store or go anywhere, I put a mask on. Absolutely, if I can handle that. What I know to be true is that some of the emails that I've received that tell us from community members that kids are doing great with masks on is not true. It's not true. And to say that kids are doing great with masks on and learning in our schools and ignoring the social and emotional impact of wearing masks and the achievement, the impact on achievement on our students, to ignore that is disrespectful of parents. It is disrespectful of our students. We would never question the validity of a student's disability being created by anything in any other way. Never. And yet in this instance, the fact that we have parents whose students have struggled with attention deficit disorder and they are finally being pushed to the moment where they have to consider putting their children on medication is not okay. If the health department had the authority to require masks, they would. They do not. No one does, including us. And that's why we need a vote. Not because I have a disagreement about the validity of masks, whether they work or not. I'd like to say, as a school board member, I will put out a PSA. If your child can wear a mask, please have them wear one. There is evidence that suggests that masks can help prohibit transmission. It is an intervention, a medical intervention that we can use to try to keep everyone around us healthy and safe. And we should if we can. But it's not a requirement. For this board to require it is not right. And I will still stand with the motion to eliminate masks, to make masks optional, for those students that need to have it optional, because that is what I believe we need to do in order to protect the rights of our parents and their minor children.
Thank you. Mrs. Berenborg and then Mrs. Rosario.
Thank you. So going back to Ms. Rosario's document that she sent us, Ms. Rosario, I believe I got that same document from one of the hundreds of emails that we received, and I found it to be very interesting as well. I thought it was a great guideline, but again, people send us tons of things, and the question is who to follow, So that would be something that I would suggest. I put it in a file. I got all this stuff in a file, and ask the superintendent to look at this, to devise his plan, because we're not supposed to be creating things. We're supposed to be approving them or suggesting approval of or directing the superintendent to create it. And that's what I'm going to ask for, is that he consider that exact thing that you gave us is exactly what I had put in here. So I appreciate that. Mrs. Zort brought up an idea about some sort of poster or something in the classrooms. That was another idea that a constituent sent me. I think we should have something that, I'm not sure it needs to be posted in the classroom, but it definitely needs to be handed to every single teacher that says, this is what the policy is in place right now. And you have been hired to follow school board policy, like it or not. That is the school board policy. And I think there are exceptions to the case that teachers are not allowing kids to have breaks with masks. They're making kids run outside with masks. And when I hear about one, that's why I wish they would call us, board members. That's our job. When you get a parent that calls you about a concern, you pick up the phone and you call the superintendent. I'm sure you do. I do. And I say, hey, and I called him yesterday about one that I saw. As I was driving back from my doctor's office, I said, Dr. Moore, this is what I just saw. Please check into it. And I think those are the cases where, as board members, we should know about those. Don't just plaster it all over social media and complain about it. Do something about it. Call a board member and say, this is happening and this shouldn't be happening because it's against school board policy, and it is. So I do think something should be given to teachers that shows what the school board policy is that we have in place.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Barenborg, I did share it with Dr. Moore, and I did ask for Dr. Moore to look into it and to meet with his team about it. But I believe that it was something that was, it rightly fell into the conversation that we were having as a board. So I felt it important to share with the board as a follow-up to what Mrs. Zork was mentioning. And the original phase-out suggestion that I had last week, or at our last meeting, for phasing out. Something that Mrs. Justice mentioned with regard to changing her action item that she didn't want, I forget her words.
End date.
The what?
Implementation date or end date?
I asked,
No,
if
it was
I
controversy
proposed to
or-
Dr. Moore, that when Mrs. Zork recognized me for the action item, that I was going to propose an amendment to give time to the
Tonight, you were gonna
superintendent.
do-
Tonight,
okay.
yes, ma'am, to give time. And I asked, is it 45 days? Is it 60 days? What amount of time would you be comfortable with? Because I understand, I'm hearing the concern, right? That this is going to be a change. And so I'm respectful of that. I've always wanted the district and the superintendent to be able to do his job and for it to function in the best way possible for our students and our teachers and our families. But I was told that that was not something that would be acceptable.
That a timeline would not be something that would be acceptable?
To have it done by.
That giving an end date, to give it an amount of days, perhaps,
Oh.
60 days, that Dr. Moore, and I understand his
understand that.
position,
Yeah.
he wanted to use some criteria based on positivity rate or based on, just as he's citing the information regarding quarantine, being 459 students quarantined and 0 being positive, he's willing to recognize the fact that quarantines may not be necessary based on the data. So I respect that. And so in my conversation, not wanting to tell him how, not wanting to propose to the board, this is what we need to tell him to do, because I was trying to respect my other board members and Dr. Moore in his position. Give us an amount of time that you feel you would be comfortable with to phase in making masks optional so that so the parents whose children are struggling can either choose to take them out of transitional until that time, put them into transitional, but to give them some opportunity to understand that we're listening, we hear them, and we know their children are struggling. And during a mental health crisis, having 60 children from our biggest high school home, missing, pre-calculus that they've chosen to take in 10th grade, AP classes, district swim meets, all these things they've been working towards is taking a real toll on their mental health. And there's a liability in that for this board.
So it's interesting because it seems like even Mrs. Barenborg and myself, I've had conversation with Dr. Moore about a timeline. I've had conversation I've even proposed one just to have a starting point. And one that I thought we would discuss this evening, not now, but now seems to be a good enough time as any. Something that I thought, and it goes to, again, this is this evening's, Mrs. Barenborg mentioned a date of November 17th, of which would be what she requested, a revision of and a summary update of the current plan that Dr. Moore would bring to the board, and she suggested November 17th. I think that's too soon. I think that we are too close to the holiday. We're in November, right around the corner right now. And then we have our Thanksgiving break coming up. So I just think that December 8th meeting would be appropriate time for him to gather all of that information, bring it to us by December 8th. And then at that point, I also thought that would be a good date for him to bring to us what that timeline would be, in concert with all of the board members, in concert with collecting information from everybody else and all the data coming together and considering that phase in or out, what I thought, and completely fluid, because we don't know if there would be an outbreak, we don't know what might happen, but completely fluid, something along the lines where we go from, and my notes here say, we go from, as I had mentioned last time, mandated masks, which is what we are in now, to highly recommended, to maybe even highly advised or advised, and then into optional. You know, how long we stay in each one of those stages, I don't know. A month? A few weeks, a month? I mean, I don't know. If we were to have 3 of those stages, then you're talking January, February, and March. At this point, it seems kind of doable. I don't know what our current state, you know, of emergency will be. Nobody knows if we're going to not have any extension of the governor's guidelines moving forward. You know, there's so many unknowns and so many variables, but I do think that what I do hear is consensus that there should be some kind of timeline. And that's what I am hearing. So at least we seem to be on the same page in that manner. And I don't know where we go from here, Madam Chair. Maybe this evening we can continue the conversation, but it's certainly something to bring to the table.
I do think tonight that we can discuss that under the proposed plan that was brought forward in the phase out of the mask. But what I'm seeing and what I'm feeling, I feel uneasy on the fact that, and I'm glad you brought this up because I thought I was the only one that would like to see a timeline, because what I feel like and what I'm seeing is that we're being placated, that we're being told what we want to hear, that it's going to be phased out and it's going to be optional, but really at the end of the day, that option might be a year from now. It might, but if we don't set the help with what our expectations are, that, I mean, we're leaving it open. And so that's where I have some reservations about this. But so tonight we can talk further about this. And one item that I want to make clear, and I appreciate you bringing this. This seems like a very nice document for adults to understand. My concern is if we go into that phase-out plan of the mask, is that I want a clear understanding for our students. I want it to be very easy to understand from our younger kids to the older kids, that these are your rights as a student, and if you feel that your rights are not being honored, I want them to fully understand that they can contact that number or whatever, or their parent can. But for me, my reservations, and I said it before, was that there was abuse in how the plan was being implemented. But yet our students, listening and honoring what the adults said, they were just going along with what the adults were telling them in the room. For me, I think it's very important that I like this, Mrs. Rosario, what you have, but, you know, yes, there's something for adults, but I want it very clear, students understand what their rights are, and they need to understand what their role is and set out.
To summarize, if I may, the rights and responsibilities, the mass rights and responsibilities, I think that's a very clever way of communicating in an age-appropriate way for all schools. And I think it's an outstanding idea because it allows us to be very upfront and use that as a tool to communicate the expectation and empower everyone with the understanding of how it is to be designed. So I think that is an absolutely outstanding idea. I think this document it's almost done for me in some other ways. So bringing back a document in terms of a next step is fine. In terms of, moving it along the lines, I think the opportunity to define what that gating criteria would be allows everyone to know. And not having control over what that criteria would be, that would be from experts for me to work with to bring a recommendation to you. And it could in fact be locally for us in a month or in 2 months. But it's not something that as COVID exits and moves away, those would be predetermined variables that we collectively agree upon. Now it is time to begin to act and then implement the phase-out plan. But to simply begin to implement a time-bound phase-out and not being able to control the reality of COVID. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons all districts have learned, including this one. You can't control or predict COVID. And, I called transitional and marketed transitional as, hey, you're just not ready yet. It's where we are with COVID when school started versus where we are now, it's actually just a little bit worse. So trying to outweight COVID isn't the best plan, but saying we will implement at this particular time, or there are opportunities to move and become significantly more flexible on how we're currently implementing the process. But by no means am I willing to engage in work to, not do that work. So it is an assurance I give to you is creating a plan that clearly defines for everyone. This is not a wishy-washy school district. They don't say one thing and then do another, and they constantly change their mind. They've established a criteria. When they met the criteria, this is what's going to happen over the course of the next several months. It's been communicated. While we're waiting for that criteria to reveal itself, this is the opportunities to fully implement the plan that's currently been approved by the board. And I'm sure that those would be additional conversations that we would have this evening.
Mrs. Berenberg and then Mrs. Justice.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to say the item that I put up there, if you clicked on the action item and you see the entire thing, you'll see that I did ask for a timeline. And I did want it quicker. And I talked to the superintendent about all these items. He thought it would take longer. And that is why we met in the middle and came up with the fact that November 17th would be a doable date for him to get all the input he needs, all the information he needs to be able to present a good, well-developed, thought-out plan to the board. Then I asked specifically for a workshop to be created on December 8th in order to move forward with the steps. At that point, we will know where we are with the emergency order. I do know and I understand that the board is going to change between that date and this date. I don't think we should keep kicking things down the road. I think we should act on this and develop a plan. So I'm going to ask Mrs. Epsilon to take this action item and print it for each person so that if you want to mark it up and say, okay, I agree to this, don't agree to that, that's where we can go with that item tonight. So that's why I put those required actions at the bottom of it.
Madam Chair.
So I'll let you hear in a second. One reservations that tonight, I know we're getting into conversations that we're going to have tonight. I do like Mrs. Rosario's suggestion of December 8th better, because I know 2 years ago when you were sworn in that night, there was all these underlying issues with investigations and everything that was going on at that time. And when you were sworn in as a brand new board member, that was not the time to be presented with that. There's a lot that happens on that night. So for that reason, I'm not going to support that night. The new board members get thrown that because I would not do that to anyone. But I do like the idea of proposing a December 8th, gives time before you go into the holidays, and you can start mulling it over and being more prepared when you come back for the beginning of the school year. So, but Mrs. Rosario had a comment or a follow-up on that?
Yeah, it was just a quick follow-up. I mean, I don't think that we are kicking the can down the road. I do believe that we are talking about it. I believe that we're trying to come to a decision. I believe that what I understand is that we are going to continue having this conversation. There is certainly direction here that the superintendent is going to move forward on as thus far, and then tonight he's going to receive more direction from us. So I don't see us kicking any can down the road. And yeah, that's it.
Okay.
May I move on to the other additional
Yes.
issues that I wanted to discuss? please?
Yes, go
Thank you
ahead.
very much. Dr. Moore, I have a couple issues that we need to address, some housekeeping issues regarding some of the changes that are currently happening within our district. Transitional students, I was called by a parent yesterday of a transitional student who wants to return back to campus, and they are being told that they need to wait until they're called, their name is called. Can you explain what that might mean? It was my understanding that students that did want to return, the student wants to return, the parent's very upset.
Through the chair, we are currently surveying families to make their identification whether they would want to return or not return. The flow of that, completion of that is tomorrow, and I think giving direction to families will allow them to make the appropriate decision. We are collecting that information, those who have filled it out now, and then beginning to work with principals on creating master schedules to accommodate whatever that need is. So right now, we are collecting that information. That window closes tomorrow, and then we will begin to transition students back as quickly as we possibly can over the course of this week and next week. And that is a tremendous, tremendous lift. But we are committed to getting that work done as quickly as possible, and it requires a great deal of coordination in order to get it done. And, there are, where we have space available right now because the teacher is in a school that only has 12 kids, obviously that's an easy fix. But as we stated, we have big goals to phase out as best we can teachers who have dual modalities, teachers who have very high class numbers in the virtual. We want to reduce those as well. We want to ensure that we're providing the highest level of support for all students without modifications or impact as a result of COVID. That was my push at the last board meeting, really was to begin the conversations about returning students back to the most powerful and impactful environment, which is brick and mortar. So,
Thank you for that explanation, and I tried to share some of those thoughts with this parent as well. I just do think it's important if we can communicate to parents who are in that waiting period to the transitional model and coming back into class, just to explain the why. It's taking a little bit of time. I think when we explain that to parents, that the level of patience and understanding will increase, and we can continue to work together to accomplish the goals that you've set for our schools, students, and staff. I am disappointed, Dr. Moore, that when we had many conversations regarding a timeline, that you didn't seem to be willing to discuss one with me. But it does seem as if other board members have had the opportunity to discuss a timeline. If there were certain conditions to that timeline that needed to be more specific for me to be able to move forward in a way to make a motion that was clear, transparent, and direct, I would have done so. And so I do sit here a little disappointed right now in that. I want to talk to you a little bit about students that are being quarantined. I'm aware of some private schools who have cameras in classrooms so that students who are quarantined can watch the instruction that's happening live in the classrooms. Can we do that?
through the chair, we cannot, I don't know if you'd want to expand, but we cannot have cameras in classrooms.
From the teacher? I can understand students, but on the teacher.
On the teacher, not on the students, just on the teacher and the instruction. That's my question.
I don't know how we could, teachers are fluid and moving all throughout the classroom. I don't know how we could.
Well, I'm
even
aware some schools are accomplishing it, so it may require, it may require some accommodations for teachers in classrooms, but I do know some schools are requiring. I'm just curious what's keeping us from doing that.
The chair, my initial response would be legalities would keep us from doing that.
Can we be more specific about those legalities?
Would you like to?
And when you say cameras in classrooms, that means a lot of different things. So I want to be sure I'm understanding what you're talking about. So my laptop has a camera on it. It's not turned on, but I can turn it on and it will look at me. So if you're talking about a instructional personnel in a classroom, the students are on that side, the teacher is on this side, and the camera is focused on the teacher without divulging the other students in the classroom, that sort of a camera is fine. WebExes happen all the time, Zoom, Teams, whatever, but it's this way and the students are not shown. But if you're talking about a camera like these cameras in this room that encompass the entire room, that is going to release otherwise confidential student information about all the students in the classroom, and so we would have quite a bit to do. But if you're talking about like a WebEx or a Teams where this camera is teacher-facing, not classroom-facing, then there, I want to understand.
No, and I'm happy to be,
understand.
I'm happy to be more specific. I'll be more specific in saying I'm not exactly sure how it happens, to be honest with you. I do know that there are schools and classrooms all over the country that are doing it. It seems to eliminate some of the issues that we have currently if we are not able to move forward in questioning the quarantine method, to allow students and teachers to continue to engage in learning and active learning and instruction. So I'm not sure, but if it's the will of this board, we could certainly direct the superintendent and staff to look into this matter. If there is some issue in bargaining contracts, for example, that may keep us from that, we have an MOU with our teachers union, perhaps we could add that to it. I am aware of the legalities of it, but it seems to be that it would be in the best interest of students, and the things we do for students aren't always easy. I'm sorry, Dr. Moore. I have another issue regarding virtual, but if you'd like to speak to that, Mrs. Moore.
Through the chair, as I mentioned earlier, we are convening that meeting with the health department, in which we'll have the opportunity to really look and engage in the conversation of the total process. My initial response would be when you're conducting that contact tracing and the professional in the room gives information, we should treat that individual as a professional and entrust that information and reduce the number of quarantines.
I'm sorry, I was asking you about the cameras in classrooms, sir.
Right, but that information could be obtained without a camera as we go through contact tracing to determine
Right.
where the student
Oh, I'm
was.
sorry, you misunderstand me. I mean a camera on the teacher so that the students can watch the teacher in live action teaching the class that they were previously in, that they are not in for 2 weeks, that they then go back to, so that they don't fall so far behind.
Understood.
Okay, thank you for that.
But
My
let me
last-
just, I'm sorry, Ms. Justice. Just so I fully understand, as a provision for a student who may be quarantined, or as an option?
When students are quarantined, they fall into a bit of a vacuum. I mean, certainly if they're in some type of a lab classroom and there are half the classes there doing labs every day with their chemistry professor, and other students are at home, they're at a disadvantage in learning. And other classes, and even though I'm aware of a teacher at the high school that actually is doing the labs twice and filming himself doing the labs and posting it on Canvas for the students to view, which is really remarkable and lovely and just is a testament to how hard our teachers work to serve our students. What I'm asking is, are we able to recreate live instruction? Are we able to capture live instruction for students who are being quarantined? I'm looking at all of, if we're not able to stop the mass quarantines, and we're not able to get an injunction against, let's say we vote on the second motion I have tonight, which is to halt mass quarantines of mass children in schools. If that doesn't come through, fine. If it does, then we have to go to step 3, which is the third motion, to ask for a judge to grant an injunction against the Florida Department of Health, halting mass quarantines. But given that I recognize that I'm one person and one person cannot, I'm just Tiffany, the next step would be, what steps are we taking to ensure that quarantine students are not falling behind? Because not only the stress and anxiety of our teachers, the stress and anxiety in our students, many of our students challenging themselves with accelerated classes and having the learning gap from the end of last year on March 13th, and then coming into this year to be quarantined the last 2 weeks, for any period of time during the first 9 weeks of school, but the last 2 days of the first 9 weeks, the first 2 weeks of the second 9 weeks, introducing new information, new standards, these students are falling behind. And it has been posed many times, why can't the kids just log into the classroom? There's a private school in Indian River County that's currently doing that for their students. I don't have an answer for that. And I'm asking you if we can look into it.
Through the chair, now that I understand what you're asking, I can research that, yes.
Thank you. The last question I have is regarding option 2, virtual learning. And this may be a question for Mr. Meyer. This is not an area that I know a lot about. Previously, before we had options in our district, students were able to enroll in Florida Virtual. Florida Virtual then captured that student's FTE. In creating the 3 options, we created an option for virtual students to participate in a third-party education that was standards aligned, standards based, that we would somewhat supervise. When you showed us data at the last special business meeting, it was very clear that the students that are in that option 2 model are falling behind at a drastic rate. And there was a great concern by staff that this was a problem that we would have to intervene with, that we would need to create extra supports by teachers to go in for these virtual students to help them with reading and math, because that was where we were seeing the largest deficits. I'm asking you today, and Mrs. Rosario actually made a comment about it when you asked for the direction to be able to go ahead and create additional supports for those students. Mrs. Rosario wasn't supportive of that, actually. She actually made a comment and said, no, I don't know if I would do that. So it made me think a little bit about Florida Virtual and the reason that it exists, and maybe I misunderstood you, but I want to ask you about the validity or the value, not validity, but the value of option 2 currently for our students going forward. Are we better to urge students to go into a transitional model or into brick and mortar rather than continuing to support option 2? I recognize that it is advantageous for the district to capture that FTE. However, it is not advantageous for the district to do that at a disservice to our students. And as the data presents itself, I'm concerned that we are providing a disservice to our students with that model. So rather than, one of the things about the options that I have heard from teachers and from principals is that there is an enormous amount of stress on the system by trying to balance all of these things. And you recognize that it would be, and you continue to applaud your teachers and your principals and everyone in schools, including children, for working to make that a reality. But sometimes doing everything isn't better than doing the things you do well. And I question the validity of taking district staff and having them supervise now this virtual model, which Florida Virtual exists on its own. There's support staff for those students that have the FTE, that they get the FTE, they support the students, they have the teachers, they have the conversation, they have the data is their data. That is Florida Virtual's data. Those students are not our students, their performance is not something that we are measured by. I question the validity of continuing that model because I believe it may be stressing the district or the system in ways that are unnecessary. And I'm asking if there have been conversations about that or if you would consider having conversations about that.
So through the chair, we began that conversation probably 4 or 5 weeks ago, and looking at the data as it came in, initially with iReady assessments, not necessarily their performance on iReady assessments, but the fact that they weren't completing them. And then looking at how students were progressing through those programs, the percent complete as they move through those particular courses, and some courses moving at a nice clip and other courses moving at a slow pace. We've asked principals and counselors to begin that conversation to bring back students when you can, as fast and as quick as possible, looking at students who are not finding success. So is it a viable option? The answer is yes. Is it a viable option? It definitely is. But students made selections at the beginning of the school year, as I said at the last meeting, based on multiple factors. Now that they're in those models and finding success or not finding success, it's our obligation to identify those students who are struggling and encourage them to come into exactly what I said at the last board meeting, to return to brick and mortar. We already have 408 students that are in virtual without even having an outcome of this evening's meeting, returning to brick and mortar. So that is a positive sign, and that's an option in which they can stay. So, or creating what would be that blended model, courses that you're finding success in, that's fine, but let's begin to explore a more explicit instructional model via the transitional opportunity where a direct teacher is providing and modifying and recreating differentiated experience opportunities for you. So I believe over the course of the next 2 weeks, we're going to make significant shifts in how that's being implemented and who is actually participating to ensure that we are responding. And I will be very, very happy to report if we get 70 to 75% of our students back in brick and mortar. That will allow us really to ensure that stress that you speak of is no longer a reality. The stress in terms of how students are distributed, the stress of teaching within a pandemic, still present. The willingness of our teachers to go above and beyond, as you mentioned, because they see where their students are coming in terms of where they historically have come in for years. I've been a third grade teacher forever, and now where I'm greeting my kids is not where typically they would be. And that is the opportunity to accelerate those outcomes as quickly as possible, and we have those additional services in place. So I anticipate coming back at this next meeting, special board meeting, and giving that would be one of the most important updates. We were able to return X numbers to school. We were able to reduce the burden for teachers. This is the criteria in which we have, and I think in some ways as stressful as this difficult conversation is to have, we're the first to have it. Yep. And we are the first to have it. And having that plan in place eliminates the conversation in December and in January and February. And if the outcome of this, whatever it is to give clear and consistent direction to our teachers, our principals, which we will do that, but most importantly to our communities, then that would be a major victory for this board. And I think that is the one struggle we have had and other districts continue to have, creating something and then COVID reality changes. And I think we have created a very, very flexible model, and I will continue to say it. We put stress on ourselves knowingly because we wanted to create models that met the needs of all kids. And we did lead with health, and it's just how God made me. I'm going to create models to be in the best interest of all children. And as I visited multiple schools, but this was at Fellsmere, just talking to teachers. I understand. You could have done the easy way out. You could have just done your third grade. You're departmentalized, and you have in the morning you have bodies in the classroom. In the afternoon, you teach the same content, but it is virtually. It's transitional. It's completely different. It's both third graders. It's both ELA. But how you're delivering it might as well be two different classes. And that's part of the stress that we want to eliminate. But teachers didn't say, I'm just going to do it the same. So we created some of that because of who we are. And I think as we get students back, I once again, if we get that 1,000 students back, that 1,000 to 1,500, And I know we are working now to get the right ones back to alleviate the concern that you have shared.
So I just want to say thank you to Dr. Moore for that answer, then I'm done. I think you've highlighted perfectly why students who are quarantined have such difficulty coming in and out of quarantine because of the lack of teaching and instruction in person. So thank you for that.
One of the questions, thank you.
Did
One
you-
of the questions that was, sorry, one of the questions that was asked earlier of me, based on a comment that I made, was I didn't think that this was the right time. And I think Mrs. Justice said, well, when is the right time? And what I want to make clear is that I thought the right time would be when we receive the transitional students back. In the process of receiving those kids back from transition into brick and mortar, we should then start looking into some of these other things that we are talking about now. And as I mentioned before, it's because we don't know what that's going to look like. We don't know how many of them are going to come back. We don't know how many of them will be in the classrooms. We have to look at staffing. Which teachers do we receive back? Do teachers who have pre-existing conditions get priority to stay home? All of those play a factor into what it looks like for the transitioning back of our transitional students into brick and mortar. So that's where I was heading with that. I wanted to talk about cameras and videos that were just mentioned. In the summer, I sent Dr. Moore and I believe Mr. Meyer, and I will send you all a link too if you're interested. It was something that's called d10.com is the website, d10.com. It is an interactive whiteboard that also has a video camera on it. I actually came across this in a Zoom professional development that I participated in for personal growth, and they shared this as an option. It was incredible the way that they showed it. It supposedly only allows the students who are at home to participate in the classroom as if they were in it live, right then and there, with the whiteboard. But from what I understand, and we need clarity on, is do they see other children in the classroom? It's my understanding that they don't see the other children in the classroom, that they only see the teacher. I don't know how that works. Maybe it's magic camera, but it does, the camera is supposed to pivot a certain degree to allow for teacher movement. As the teacher writes on the whiteboard, the student participates looking. So I think that's what you may be referring to, Mrs. Justice, on how can we look into some of these options that allow for students to learn from home and still engage in the classroom activity. I believe at the time, somebody quoted like $500, and it was in this online chat. So they're pricey. And maybe this might be a good opportunity for us to look into a grants writer, right? So that we can
Well, we got $3
have
million in CARES Act
these,
money.
opportunities for it. The other thing that I wanted to mention with regard to virtual school is I am a 100% proponent of virtual school. I don't remember, I don't know what comment, Mrs. Justice, you think I may have made. I don't recall what you were talking about. I do, however, believe that we need to look into our instructional model within the virtual school. So there are different instructional models within virtual. So there is the instructional model where the teacher is providing direct instruction. There could be the virtual model where the teacher is providing something like this, where there is a dual purpose. And then there is the instructional model in virtual school where the teacher is just the facilitator. And the student works through the modules on a self-paced process, and then the teacher only receives the work and then provides feedback and is sort of like may teach one live lesson a week. Some of those models vary. So I think this is the direction that I know Dr. Moore and I have talked about that we need to get better at. We need to improve on our virtual instruction. I don't want us to give up on that platform. It is the wave of the future, virtual, and certainly now with COVID being a reality, it is not something that is going to go away. So I don't want us to move away from that, but I do want us to make it where it might even be better than Florida virtual. Florida Virtual has an amazing program, but they've also been in that field for
15 years.
Yeah, a long time.
100 years.
I think
I mean,
15.
they're the first of their kind to go global in virtual education as a public institution. So we can't compare, right? I think they're apples and oranges, but we certainly need to move in that direction, and I do believe that we would get there.
Mrs. Rosari, can I ask Mrs. Rosari a question?
Yes.
Mrs. Rosari, so my question would be, in all of the, I don't disagree with you about us continuing to improve upon a virtual model. The question that I would ask would be, in all of the things that were happening, and this is something that the board approved, and we'll own it for what it is, but in all of the things that were happening, when you talk about the validity of Florida Virtual in what it provides, I just am having a hard time wrapping my head around why we tried to recreate something that was existing, that we could have allowed parents to opt into, that was well-functioning, that would have given those students that chose that option a chance to work within a model that had already been fully vetted. And there are always problems with every instructional model. I mean, with Florida Virtual, I hear things about it that are concerning sometimes, as there are with other things as well. But just solely to capture the FTE of those students was not a good enough reason for us to create to recreate the wheel with that. That's a concern I have as a board member. It's a reflection of my judgment as a board member as I look back on the decisions this board has made. And I just wanted to highlight that and bring that to Dr. Moore's attention, because as we move forward, it's important that we reflect upon the decisions we've made to make better decisions in the future.
Dr. Schiff, you had, no, you're done? Save it for tonight?
I am completely done.
Okay. All right, it is 4:38. We're 38 minutes past our end time. Let me ask you a couple
Okay, go ahead. Yeah,
questions so that you can be prepared tonight to answer.
Okay, absolutely, ma'am.
So I too am hearing that there's confusion on, and not confusion, but not clarity yet on when the students are going to be put back into the brick and mortar, if they're transitional or if they're virtual right now. So that also, I would like us to look at that. And then I'm hearing students asking, because they're asking my son and my other kids, ask your mom if I'm going to be able to keep my same transitional teacher. I think that, that also needs to be clarified on what that plan is. And then I was going to ask you, when is your next Facebook Live? Because that was probably going to be when you would present all that information. When is your Facebook Live?
Through the chair, we didn't schedule one. We'll probably do one towards the end of this week just to give parents an update. The deadline to complete the survey is tomorrow. I know the overwhelming majority of parents are waiting to see the decision made this evening regarding model selection, and then the variables as it relates to returning students, virtual assignments, keeping my transitional teacher, all dependent upon the selection process as we move students back into brick and mortar.
Okay.
Mrs. Cirque, I have one additional request of the superintendent. Do you have Ms. Ramsey's statement in writing? Without a citation to the rule that shows that they'll pull funding, I'm going to have a hard time using that as weighing any part of my decision. So if we could have that in writing, please.
I'll work on that.
Okay. And Dr. Moore, you want to wrap up and then we'll...
I just wanted
come
to
back.
advise the board, we do have a significant number of emails that were sent in, a total of 269. I know you all have received them, so that's just to put that on your radar. So it'll be a long evening.
Okay. All right, so let's adjourn and then we'll come back at 6 p.m.
Thank you.